Chapter 143. Feng Ling stepped on one of the men's crotch and stomped down harshly. The cries on the ground intensified, causing the office glass to tremble. Jinwan wanted to hold Feng Ling back but was unable to. The short-haired woman's movements were unbelievably nimble. In an instant, CEO Xiao, who was standing by the side in shock, was kicked in the face. He fell to the ground pathetically and half his face turned green. There were two more thugs behind them. Seeing this, they immediately rushed over while cursing. Jinwan's fingers gripped Feng Ling's clothes tightly, worried that someone would die. This time she truly understood how powerful Mo Jingxian was. Right now, she was worried that CEO Zhao's thugs would not be able to leave this place alive. Jinwan resisted the urge to clap and cheer. Her studio had just started. If a murder case were to occur just like that, it would be a huge taboo in doing business. One of the thugs angrily reached over to grab Jinwan's hair and drag her out. The moment his hand approached Jinwan, Feng Ling raised her leg and kicked him. It was as though no matter who the other party was, as long as they dared to touch Jinwan, she would not be polite. Feng Ling directly injured the two men's legs. She could vaguely hear the sound of their kneecaps breaking. Jinwan's back trembled. She then saw that the two men's manhood was about to be destroyed under Feng Ling's feet. Wait, don't kick them. Jinwan rushed to grab Feng Ling's arm. There's a police station near this building. Call the police to come and take them away. There will be people who will teach them a lesson. This country isn't like your overseas training base. Don't kill them. Feng Ling's movements finally paused. Her expression was cold and vicious as she glanced at the trash rolling on the ground. She originally thought that since Jinwan was in the studio and there were security guards in this building, she would be fine as long as she did not go out. She took some time to buy a bottle of water. However, the moment she returned, she heard screams and the sound of things being kicked over. She rushed in to see that Jinwan was almost injured by those people. Feng Ling did not speak. She moved her foot away from the man's manhood and retreated behind Jinwan, maintaining a distance that would not hinder her but ensure her safety. Jinwan helped Xiaoba up. Are you all right? Xiaoba shook her head, looked nervously at the person behind Jinwan, and whispered, Boss, she's amazing. Jinwan smiled. Previously, she had doubted how capable this female bodyguard was. As it turned out, his suspicions were unnecessary. He really shouldn't have. Since she was someone Mo Jingxian had specially selected to be by her side, how could she not be powerful? The police arrived very quickly. When they took the thugs away, President Xiao was also dragged up in a sorry state. Jinwan specially asked the police officer in charge of the previous incident. She confirmed that the video of CEO Xiao and Supervisor Su having an affair outside had been discovered by them after their investigation, and that it was not someone from her studio who had nosily handed over the video on her computer. Only then did she feel reassured. As long as these things really had nothing to do with the people in her studio, she was too lazy to ask again. When President Xiao was brought away, he heard Jinwan's conversation with the police officer. He was slightly vexed, and his expression was difficult to calm down. It was clear that he had already been disturbed at home. A man who originally had good looks and a good family background was beaten black and blue by a female bodyguard in the blink of an eye. Right now he could not even raise his head. He could only glare at Jinwan with indignation. In the end, in the next moment he was held down by the police and brought away. In the evening, Jinwan went to the construction site under the studio's name and returned after an hour. In the car, Jinwan sat in the back row, supporting her head with one hand as she read the documents in her other hand. When she heard her phone ring, she picked it up and listened to the report from the HR department. Right now, she had a good understanding of many industries and market trends in the country. She could also guarantee that in the future the studio would be able to expand. In time, it would definitely become the largest real estate group in the country. However, making money from doing business and managing a business were two different things. Right now, because the studio had received far more investment than expected, the amount of land and real estate she had to purchase would also increase. The studio needed to expand, and the HR department, finance department, and other departments had countless things for her to worry about every day. Jinwan vainly hoped that in this life, she could stand at the peak of both love and career. However, although she had previously studied in America and had a good degree, she did not have a major in business management or business operation. Even if her brain and foresight were sufficient, she was still somewhat lacking in management. She had only just started and she was already in a terrible mess. These 2 days, Xia Tian had sent her a message saying that she would come to her studio to help after being discharged from the hospital. However, this was still not enough. Jinwan supported her head with her hand and placed her phone aside. She turned to look at the darkening sky outside the car window. At night in the U Garden. With Auntie Chen's dinner, Jinwan most likely would not have the opportunity to see Mo Jingshan personally cook for a while. On the dining table, Mo Jingshan's chopsticks had just reached over, and Jinwan's chopsticks accidentally bumped into it. He glanced at her and used his chopsticks to pick up another dish. Jinwan's chopsticks followed. Like this, the chopsticks fight, for a long time before Mo Jingshan finally put down his chopsticks. His deep, dark eyes stared unblinkingly at Jinwan, and there seemed to be a faint smile hidden in his eyes. The man's hand was casually placed on the table, and his posture was leisurely. It was a stark contrast to Jinwan, who seemed to have something on her mind. Something on your mind? His slender fingers picked up the dishes in front of him, placing them in front of Jinwan in case she could not reach them. Jinwan finally returned to herself. She raised her head to meet his interested gaze, and when she lowered her head, she saw that almost all of her favorite dishes had been placed in front of her. She directly put down her chopsticks, saying, "Recently, I plan to buy some books on business management and self-study at home. Do you have any good books to recommend?" Mo Jingshan picked up the glass on the table, lowering his head to slowly drink a mouthful of water. Even though he was drinking ordinary water, he still had the elegance and composure of a high-end red wine. Following which, the man unhurriedly said, "It's just an investment of 200 million yuan, and it's already giving you so much pressure? You still want to buy books to self-study business management?" Why did it feel like he was mocking her? Jinwan picked up her chopsticks again, picking up a mouthful of vegetables and placing it in her mouth to chew. She unhappily said, "Why do I feel like the great Mo is looking down on me? Only you can turn 50 million yuan into 3 billion yuan in 3 years. Can't I be better than you?" Chapter 144. Jinwan pursed her lips. "No, I'm only suitable to be your wife. It's fine to be kissed, hugged, and raised up by you. If you were to be my tutor, I'm sure you'd scold me until I develop a fragile heart." The smile on Mo Jingshan's handsome face deepened. He reached out to ladle a bowl of soup for Jinwan. "How could I possibly scold you?" That's right, he wouldn't scold her. Wasn't using his actions to make her cry from night to day a more brutal punishment? "Eat first. Don't sit there in a daze," Mo Jingshan reminded. Jinwan picked up the bowl and began eating. She quickly and decisively finished her meal before running upstairs into Mo Jingshan's study to look for books. In the end, after searching for a long time, she could not find the books she wanted to read. Instead, they were mostly famous business cases and books in various languages. The rest were mostly files from the company temporarily placed at home. Unable to find them, Jinwan gave up on his study. She turned around to leave when she saw the man standing by the study door. The light in the study was not particularly bright. Mixed with the moonlight shining in from the window, it made him appear like a cool breeze and a bright moon. However, he appeared slightly mysterious. "What are you looking for?" He entered and reached out to hold Jinwan's back, pulling her in front of him. His fingers gently caressed her hair and slender back. His warm breath landed on Jinwan's cheek, warm and ambiguous. Jinwan thought in her heart, as expected, she couldn't let Mo Jingshan be her tutor. Otherwise, whenever she looked for him to study, he would flirtatiously throw her onto the bed for a while. It would really affect the progress of her studies. "I thought there would be books on business management in your study. In the end, there isn't a single one. I don't read those things. Of course there aren't any." Thus, some geniuses were born with it. Managing such a large company and still managing it in an orderly manner, when Mo Jingshan took over America's Shine Group in the future, he would most likely be just as skilled or even more skilled. Mo Jingshan's cell phone rang. Jinwan did not delay him from picking it up. She turned back to his study and brought out a classic English book with business cases to read. When he returned from the call, the man carried her, who was reading on the bed, onto his lap. Jinwan shifted her gaze away from the book and raised her eyes. "Why are you looking at me? I don't understand the books in other languages in your study. I can only read this book in English." Mo Jingshan glanced at her again and took the book from her hands. He flipped through several pages and stopped halfway through, returning the book to her. "There are a few foreign real estate marketing cases at the back of this page," he said lightly. Jinwan took a few more serious glances and raised her head to look at his handsome and perfect side profile. She asked in surprise, "The books on the bookshelves are written in at least 7 or 8 languages from different countries. Don't tell me you've read all of them? And you remember the contents of every single book?" He chuckled and calmly hugged her. Having a photographic memory is also an essential instinct for a business manager. No matter when or where, you must have an impression of every detail that concerns the company, big or small, so that you can better judge the situation and make the most perfect analysis and decision. Jinwan raised the book. You're going to teach me now. If you can maintain your gentlemanly attitude, I can consider letting you be my tutor. Mo Jingshan held back his laughter, caressing her face. I've slept with you countless times inside and out. Now you want me to be a gentleman? Lying to myself is not the attitude a business manager should have. She could not win against him. Jinwan lowered her head to continue reading. Even when night fell, she was still staring at the book on the bed. Mo Jingshan pulled her under the blankets and lightly said, "Grandfather just called. He asked us to return to the Mo family home for a night the day after tomorrow." "Why are you suddenly going back? Is there something?" Mo Jingshan brought Jinwan into his embrace. "And Shuyan and her father will be staying at the Mo family home as guests for the next few days. Their flight back to America has already been booked. Although grandfather does not plan on having too much of a relationship with the Yin family, as the head of the Mo family, he still has to be polite. He asked us to go back for a meal as a farewell. Why do I feel that this isn't a request grandfather would make?" Jinwan raised her head to look at Mo Jingshan's expression. Mo Jingshan rubbed her head. "You saw through it but didn't say it out loud. You're smart. With me around, no matter if it's the Mo family or the Ji family, no one will dare to eat you." Jinwan bit down on his chin. "It's already good enough that I didn't eat in Shuyan. Who can eat me? Mo Jingshan bit back on her lips. "I can eat." Jinwan raised her head to continue biting him. The two of them bit for a long time. Jinwan's breathing became more hurried. In the end, she hurriedly called for a stop and did not move around under him. Mo Jingshan's hand held her slightly cold feet under the blankets. His brows furrowed slightly. "Your feet are so cold. It's almost mid-autumn. The weather outside is only a few degrees above zero. Every year my hands and feet are always cold at this time." Jinwan allowed her feet to remain in his palms and did not pull them out. "I heard from the elderly that when your hands and feet are cold, it means that no one is hurting you." Mo Jingshan kissed the corner of her lips. "Haven't I doted on you enough?" Jinwan had only said it casually, but in the blink of an eye, she was instantly killed by his words. She could not retort back and simply moved her feet in his palms. In an instant they were held by him again. "I won't torment you anymore. Rest early. When you return to the Mo family, go to the back mountain to soak in a hot spring. It'll help with your cold body." His tone was light. Jinwan's eyes immediately brightened. The Mo family's back mountain's hot spring? Isn't that a place that doesn't allow outsiders to enter easily? "You're Mrs. Mo, not an outsider." Mo Jingshan's words landed, using his gaze to warn her to quickly place the book in her hands aside. He softly said, "Sleep." Perhaps because she was used to being dominated by him in bed, Jinwan immediately obediently placed the book on the bedside table. The next day, Feng Ling drove. Jinwan sat in the car and browsed through the news on her phone. She suddenly saw the news of Haiqing Tianxing Investment Company being taken down. Even if the police were to interfere, their actions would not have been so fast. Furthermore, with money, even the devil would turn millstones. If CEO Xiao and CEO Jin both wanted to protect the company, they could bear with each other and turn the big problem into a small one. The police would not be able to continue interfering. Now that this company had suddenly been taken down, it was equivalent to closing down overnight. Jinwan's fingers paused on the screen. She turned to look at Feng Ling, who was driving. "Yesterday's matter, did you tell Mo Jingshan?" Feng Ling focused on driving while replying, "Yes." "No wonder. Mo Jingshan was really too black-bellied. Last night he did not make a move. In the end, this company actually quietly died in his hands." Chapter 145. The next evening, Jinwan and Mo Jingshan returned to the Mo home together and saw several cars parked in the front yard. Director Mo had only returned to the country once, but there were already so many cars following him. As the owner of Shine Group, he was indeed extraordinary. Returning to the country, there were countless bodyguards by his side. Even the bodyguards' cars were all luxury cars worth at least 1,000,000 yuan. It was truly an extraordinary extravagance. By the time the two entered the Mo home, because it was approaching mid-autumn, there was already a festive atmosphere in the house. The moment they entered the front hall, they saw elder Mo and Mo Xiaoza drinking tea and chatting with Father An. It was as though they were discussing something worth being happy about, and their faces were all filled with smiles. And Shuyan sat by Father An's side. She raised her eyes to see Jinwan and Mo Jingshan walking in with their fingers intertwined. Seeing this scene, Mo Xiaoza's originally smiling face instantly darkened. He glanced at Fatherin, and when Fatherin saw Jinwan, his gaze became more distant and cold. He looked at Jinwan with a judgmental gaze. "Grandfather." Jinwan greeted Elder Mo as though there was no one around. Her expression was natural, and she was not swayed by those people's gazes. She then calmly looked at Mo Xiaoza, whose expression was not very good. "Dad." Mo Xiaoza coldly retracted his gaze and did not even make a sound in response. Jinwan did not feel awkward. She smiled at Father and Mr. and "Hello. I'm Jingshan's wife. My name is Jinwan." After all, Jinwan's attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. No matter how unhappy Fatherin was, he could not show it as obviously as Mo Xiaoza. Furthermore, Elder Mo was sitting by the side with a smile. "No need to be polite. Miss Ji, please sit," Fatherin replied. And Shuyan also revealed a polite and mild smile. She looked at Jinwan and then at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan handed the gift box that Jinwan had bought on the way to the housekeeper, Uncle O, saying, "Jinwan heard that Dad and Uncle An are going back to the United States. She knows that it's hard to drink authentic domestic tea abroad, and she knows that Dad and Uncle An have a hobby of tasting tea for many years, so she specially bought a few boxes of Bai Luo Chun before coming here." There was obvious dissatisfaction on Mo Xiaoza's face, but after all, now was not the time to instigate Jinwan in private. Seeing that Jinwan had been so natural and polite since she entered the door, he could not find any fault with her. He frowned slightly and coldly answered, "And leave it." Just as Uncle O was about to take the boxes of tea they brought to the back, Elder Mo suddenly looked back and raised his eyebrows. "Is it Dongting Biluakun? This is indeed an authentic good tea that is hard to buy overseas. I haven't drunk Bai Luo Chun in a long time. Quick, brew the tea that Ji last brought, I want to taste it first." "Okay, Grandpa," Uncle O answered and left. "Ji last, don't just stand there. Why are you still standing in front of your own house? Come and sit with Grandpa." Elder Mo waved to Jinwan again. Jinwan walked over with a smile, exchanged a look with Mo Jingshan, and sat down next to Elder Mo. "Speaking of which, this is the second time I've seen Miss Ji." At this time, Fatherin suddenly spoke, looking at Jinwan inquiringly. "That day at the dinner party of Shine, I didn't have a chance to talk to Miss Ji. I only remember that Jingshan took you upstairs. Was Miss Ji not feeling well at that time?" Almost everyone present knew what had happened to Jinwan that day. Mo Xiaoza, the initiator of the incident, was sitting next to him, but Fatherin asked this question. He was clearly deliberately making things difficult for Jinwan. Jinwan smiled frankly. "That day I accidentally drank too much and fell asleep in the bathroom. If Jingshan hadn't found me, I would have slept in there all night. I was so shameful that day. Mr. N, please don't make fun of me." Elder Mo, on the other hand, laughed by the side. The others naturally could not laugh. Her reply was too magnanimous. It was like a child who had accidentally drunk too much and was sticking out her tongue to beg for forgiveness in front of her elders. However, she avoided being instigated. This caused Fatherin to involuntarily narrow his eyes. Mo Jingshan's gaze carried a smile, and his tone was calm as he spoke. "The small matters between husband and wife really shouldn't be brought up to the table. She usually doesn't have many opportunities to drink, and her alcohol tolerance is indeed poor. That night, she only drank a few glasses of champagne before finding a place to sleep. It took me a long time to find her." "A few glasses of champagne and you're already drunk. Miss G's alcohol tolerance is indeed not good." Fatherin also smiled, but his smile did not reach his eyes. "Mr. N, you really are making fun of me. When I was young, I often took medicine. During those years, I was allergic to alcohol. After I grew up, I was no longer allergic, but my father never allowed me to drink. My temper is a little stubborn. I feel that if others can drink, I can also drink. Thus, I often find opportunities to secretly drink a few glasses, but every time, I'm a complete drunk." She smiled as she spoke. "Jingshan is also always controlling me. That night, I secretly hid by the side and drank a few glasses. In the end, I almost made a fool of myself." Jinwan lowered her brows as though she was very embarrassed. "These few days, Jingshan has been nagging me quite a bit. In the future, he most likely won't allow me to touch a single drop of alcohol. He's even stricter than my father." Father An's smile faded slightly. His eyes coldly stared at Jinwan, who had been smiling the entire time. He was already somewhat unhappy, but he did not say it out loud. For a man to control his wife like this, to the point that he would constantly watch over such a small matter like drinking, the underlying meaning was that Mo Jingshan really cared about Jinwan. Mo Xiaozi could hear that Jinwan, this clear-headed little lass, was purposely putting father in a bad spot. His cold voice abruptly rang out. If your alcohol tolerance isn't good, then don't come out and walk around. After all, you still have the title of Mrs. Mo on your head. If there's a day when you drink a few drops of alcohol in public, you won't only be throwing away your own face. The moment Mo Xiaozi's words came out before anyone else could speak, Elder Mo immediately glared at him. What are you talking about? That G-brat, no matter if she's at home or outside, no one can find any fault with her actions. Mo Xiaozi's sharp gaze turned cold. In front of everyone, being carried back to the room by Jing Shen in front of everyone, isn't that embarrassing enough? In front of so many people, just whose actions are the most unpresentable. Mo Jingshan calmly spoke. His voice was cold. Do you really want to say it out loud here? Although Mo Jingshan's voice was clearly no different from his usual tone, everyone present could acutely sense the hidden undercurrent within. They only needed to be distracted for a moment, and it was as though they would be frozen into ice by his silent, biting coldness. Chapter 146. Mo Jingshan's eyes were dark. His thin lips curved up, but his smile was cold. It's exactly what the words mean. After exposing everything under the thin paper in front of everyone, Mo Xiaozi's expression could no longer maintain his composure. His expression was enraged. The father and son exchanged glances. In an instant, the hall became as cold as an icehouse. And Shu Yin, who sat by Father An's side, did not speak. She raised her eyes to see Mo Jingshan sitting there. Although his expression was cold, he still maintained the position of holding Jinwan's 10 fingers. His 2 long legs wrapped in his suit pants were lazily crossed. His entire person appeared calm and casual, but his brows carried a viciousness that surpassed this hypocritical calmness. The matter of Jinwan being locked in the restroom that day, he did not plan on letting it go so peacefully. This topic should not have been brought up in the first place. If they really brought it up, the one who would suffer in the end would not be Jinwan, who had been pressured by them. Just as Mo Xiaozi was about to open his mouth in anger, and Shu Yin warmly suggested, "Grandfather Mo, I heard that the back mountain of the Mo family has a spring that was dug out 100 years ago. It's connected to Hai Cheng's dragon vein and is a natural 4-colored hot spring that is rarely seen in the country. Before returning to America, would Shu Yin have the luck to soak in this legendary Mo family hot spring?" It was clear that Shu Yin was trying to change the topic and pause this scene of colliding icebergs. Mo Xiaozi unhappily glanced at Jinwan. However, Jinwan only smiled at him. Unlike the sharp words she used in front of the hotel that day, in front of outsiders, she still had her own sense of propriety. Although this young girl appeared to be relying on Mo Jingshan's presence to protect her, her mind was clear and she knew how to cooperate with Mo Jingshan. Every word, action was perfectly coordinated. At this moment, Elder Mo was already smiling at Shu Yin. "Aya, it's just a private hot spring at home. It's not as amazing as you say. Grandfather Mo, you're too humble. The Mo family's hot spring has always been famous in the country." And Shu Yin followed the elder's good mood and continued, "I heard that frequently soaking in the Mo family's 4-colored hot spring can cure 100 illnesses. It's all because it's been exaggerated by outsiders. The so-called 4 colors hot spring is actually the result of the Chinese medicine developed by the Mo family over the last few decades." As Elder Mo spoke, he stood up. "It just so happens that there are quite a few small hot springs on the other side of the hot spring. It's more suitable for you ladies to go together. Since Shu Yin wants to go take a look, then let's all go soak in it today." As he spoke, Elder Mo continued, "Jing Shina, bring the G-brat along. It's good for the body to soak in the hot spring often. Right now, the G-brat is burdened with the mission of letting me carry my great-grandson as soon as possible. We can't miss out on something like this." Old Master Sheng's words were really well thought out, completely cutting off Shu Yin's last chance to perform. He was truly protecting Jinwan. Father An did not know how to express his thoughts. And Shu Yin continued to smile gracefully, but her gaze occasionally shifted toward Mo Jingshan's position. The Mo family's hot spring was indeed different from the various high-grade and low-grade hot springs outside. It was located in the back mountain of the Mo family's home and was meticulously built in an antique-style cave. Although under Elder Mo's warm invitation, there were many people who came to soak in the hot spring together. Thankfully, the 4 colors hot spring was located in the center, and there were several small springs and hot springs that were blocked off. It was convenient for Shu Yin and Jinwan. After all, the elder and the others were men. It was not a big deal for them to chat and soak in the Four Colors hot spring. However, Shuyan and Jinwan were women. Even if they were both wearing clothes, it was still not very appropriate. Jinwan was arranged to stay in the innermost medicinal spring. When she passed by the rose spring behind a stone door, she saw that Shuyan had already been brought in by the Mo family's helper. The medicinal spring was located in the innermost part of the hot spring cave. It was very secluded. When Jinwan sat in the hot spring, she felt slightly hot. After slowly adjusting to the temperature, her face began to sweat. She felt very comfortable and slowly stretched her body to lean against the spring. Her hair was tied up high, and her exposed neck and face were gradually covered in sweat due to the temperature of the water. After soaking like this for about 20 minutes, Jinwan was so comfortable that she almost fell asleep. All of a sudden, there seemed to be someone approaching from behind, but there was no particularly big movement. She abruptly returned to her senses and turned back to see Mo Jingshan walking in with the medicinal fragrance of the Four Colors hot spring. Jinwan was startled. "Why aren't you continuing to stay with grandfather and the others? I can't possibly leave you here alone. It's easy to fall asleep after soaking in the hot spring for too long. I'm here to take a look." Mo Jingshan said he was only here to take a look, but he had already unhurriedly walked in. As he entered the pool of hot spring in front of her, the water surface rippled slightly. Jinwan originally sat in the hot spring without moving. The man's arm reached out from the water and directly pulled her over, asking, "How do you feel?" "It's all right. It's just a little hot." Mo Jingshan smiled, holding her and sitting with her for a while. He lowered his eyes to see that her little face was slightly red from the heat of the water and was about to kiss her on the cheek. All of a sudden, there seemed to be someone approaching from outside. Jinwan heard the sound. Afraid that someone would see her, she rushed to push him away. However, the man tightened his grip around her waist. At the same time he turned back, calmly watching Shuyan, who had suddenly walked in. Shuyan clearly did not expect to see Mo Jingshan here, nor did she expect to see the two of them in the hot spring, hugging each other. The moment she walked in and saw such a scene, her first reaction was not to leave immediately. Instead, she stood there, as though she had not returned to her senses for a while. "Sorry." 10 seconds later, she forced herself to return to her senses. She looked at them. "Mo, earlier on, I was a little bored at the Rose Spring and wanted to come over to chat with Mrs. Mo. I didn't expect." Mo Jingshan's tone was mild. "There's nothing to apologize for. But if you and Jinwan are in the same hot spring, it will only be more boring." Shuyan's expression faltered. Jinwan also subtly glanced at Shuyan. The meaning behind Mo Jingshan's words was to mock Shuyan for running over to chat with Jinwan. In the end, it would only result in the two women sitting together awkwardly finding topics to talk about. Thus, it was true that there was no need for her to come and chat with Jinwan. Even if they did chat, there would not be any good things to talk about. This man hid a poisonous tongue behind his composure. He was truly magnanimous and heartless. From start to finish, Mo Jingshan did not seem to have crossed the line with Shuyan in any way that he should not have. Even at the Shine Group's banquet, he was still cold and warm, maintaining a seal of alienation and indifference. Chapter 147. My apologies for disturbing you. Although Shuyan had suffered a blow, she maintained a polite smile on her face. She took one last deep look at the man in the same hot spring as Jinwan before abruptly turning to leave. Only when Shuyan's footsteps were far away did Jinwan place her chin on Mo Jingshan's shoulder. Secretarian is actually quite good at enduring. Based on her IQ and EQ, she may be able to endure failure and grievances. However, it's clear that you've hurt her pride. For a proud woman, pride is her true bottom line. Because at that moment, Jinwan saw an unbearable suppression appear in Shuyan's eyes. Perhaps no matter how much she heard about Jinwan and Mo Jingshan's love, it was not as much of a blow as seeing the two of them being so intimate in the hot spring. Mo Jingshan pushed aside her wet hair that was stuck to his neck. The warm water fell from his palm onto her collarbone. Jinwan turned to look at the man's face that was inches from hers. Mo Jingshan's tone was calm. "Do you wish for me to care more about her pride or your feelings?" Jinwan raised her brows, biting down on his shoulder. "Why did you throw this suicidal question back at me? One is a woman who has nothing to do with me, and that little bit of pride that has nothing to do with me. The other is the wife I've set my heart on, the woman who will accompany me for the rest of my life. This is a very clear line between heaven and earth. She's the one who can't see it clearly." Mo Jingshan rubbed her ears, his voice low and gentle. "You also know that this is a suicidal question. The correct answer is right there, Yet you insist on me giving you a reason to satisfy your curiosity. Jinwan raised her lips, no longer biting him. Instead she planted a kiss on his chin. It seems like I should stamp the #1 husband in history. Stamping is fine, but kissing is too simple. It's ineffective. The man held her waist under the water, planting a kiss on her lips. When we return to the room, stamp it properly. You can stamp it however you want. Don't mess around. This is the Mo family. It's more important to spend time with grandfather tonight. Jinwan was serious. Mo Jingshan's tone was also very serious. It's also important to accompany your husband to sleep. After soaking for too long, he planned to leave the hot spring pool and return to his room to rest. Jinwan stayed inside to change her clothes. When Mo Jingshan stepped out of the small hot spring, and Shuyan was still wearing the hot spring outfit. Her long hair fell behind her. Hearing the movement, she turned back to look at Mo Jingshan. President Mo, and Shuyan stared at his handsome face. Even though he had just come out from the hot spring, it was still elegant and warm. This is the Mo family after all. We are guests here. Thankfully, the person who entered earlier was me. If it was Uncle Mo or my father who saw this, who knows what they would think of Jinwan. And Shuyan's meaning was clear. She was hinting that Jinwan was here seducing Mo Jingshan. If the two of them were to be intimate here, it was equivalent to not placing father and Father Mo in their eyes. She almost blurted out the words immoral. Normally, a husband and wife would occasionally be intimate. I didn't expect it to be an eyesore to Miss, and Jinwan had already changed her clothes and walked out. Without waiting for the cold and indifferent Mo Jingshan to speak, she walked over with a light smile. Miss An has a family background that causes others to shrink back, as well as an astute and intelligent upbringing. You must have your eyes on the top of your head. However, this sort of sanctimonious judgment shouldn't be placed on us. Jinwan approached Mo Jingshan's side and glanced at Shuyan. We're legally married. Don't mention that we only kissed and hugged earlier. Even if we really did something uncontrollable, I'm afraid it wouldn't have anything to do with offending public morals. And Shuyan originally wanted to use this opportunity to speak to Mo Jingshan alone. However, she did not expect Jinwan to walk out so quickly and in such a timely manner. This extremely taboo phrase of uncontrollable was, of course, something that only Jinwan and Mo Jingshan could do. And Shuyan was silent for a moment before smiling slightly. I've interacted with Mrs. Mo several times, but I still don't know you very well. I'll be leaving tomorrow. Are you sure you want to leave such an impression on me, Mrs. Mo? Jinwan really wanted to laugh. It seemed like this in Shuyan was really poisoned by Mo Jingshan. What she could not obtain was always the best. Even if she returned to America, he would forever be the evergreen tree and white moonlight in her heart. She would not allow any other woman to taint him. Missin, you should know what kind of person I am. From the first time you met me in the company, you've already thoroughly investigated my trump card. Furthermore, is the impression I leave on you that important? Jinwan raised her brows and chuckled lightly. Missin, it's fine to be conceited, but don't be too arrogant and think too highly of yourself. Mo Jingshan coldly spoke. To Jinwan, the Mo family is her own home. How she acts at home is her freedom. There's no need to hide it. And Shuyan looked at him and suddenly chuckled. I thought your feelings for Jinwan were only due to the responsibility of marriage and a momentary passion. After all, for someone like you who is always calm and rational when it comes to marriage and feelings, you will definitely consider the benefits of all aspects. I didn't expect you to be so serious about her. Mo Jingshan did not speak. His gaze remained indifferent. And Shuyan raised her head and looked at him. A person who stands too high is not suitable to give all of his feelings. You're so rational, yet you're willing to live such a life? Mo Jingshan did not plan to continue speaking with her. He held on to Jinwan's hand and walked out. And Shuyan abruptly asked just as he was about to brush past them, do you think that you'll be together with her for the rest of your life? I will. Mo Jingshan turned and looked at her seriously. His tone was calm and not abrupt, but it heavily struck Jinwan's heart. Are you so sure that you won't divorce her? I'm sure. He did not have the slightest bit of hesitation. His tone was unreasonably calm, but it was as though he was speaking of something that could not be more natural. The embarrassment on Shuyan's face could no longer be concealed. When she looked at him, her gaze was very deep. In the end, she abruptly turned and quickly walked away from their eyes. Her footsteps were slightly panicked. It was as though the conversation earlier did not affect Mo Jingshan at all. After Shuyan walked far away, he held on to Jinwan's hand and took long strides walking out. They had not walked far when Jinwan's heart stirred. She did not even know what she was thinking. She suddenly used the strength of his hand to quickly approach him, hugging him from behind. Mo Jingshan paused. He turned back to hug her. What's wrong? Jinwan raised her head in his embrace. We'll be together for the rest of our lives without divorcing. Right now I still have some looks to look at. When I'm old and withered, are you sure you won't be tired of me? Mo Jingshan raised his brows. When you're old and withered, I'll only be older than you. Chapter 148. And even if it's tofu, this flower of mine will only be planted on you. Seeing that Jinwan was choked to the point of glaring at him, Mo Jingshan suddenly flicked her head. What are you thinking about? Don't be so dirty. He was clearly the dirtiest. It's about time. It's too stuffy here. Let's go out first. Mo Jingshan turned around. At this moment, the sound of Mo Xiaoza and Elder Mo's conversation could be heard from afar, accompanied by the sound of footsteps approaching. Where's Jingshan? After chatting for a while at the four-colored hot spring, he suddenly disappeared. He still hasn't returned. It was Mo Xiaoza's icy voice. Elder Mo calmly replied, Jingshan never liked to soak in the hot spring when he was young. He probably already left. Don't tell me he went in to look for Jinwan? The infamily is still here, yet that Jinwan dares to bother Jingshan. Just how disrespectful is she? Mo Xiaoza said as he walked over. His tone was clearly unhappy. When Jinwan heard this, she subconsciously pushed Mo Jingshan into a crack in the corner of the cave. The space here was very small and could only fit 2 people. They had to stick close to each other to stand steadily. Her entire body leaned against him. When Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to glance at her, she raised her hand to make a shu expression. Mo Jingshan did not plan to dodge at all. However, seeing this little woman's expression was too vivid, he allowed her to press him against the crack of the rock. He held her waist to prevent her waist from being hit by the edge of the rock. Right now we can't be sure if Jingshan has already left. Jinwan probably isn't inside. Why are you still walking in? Elder Mo nagged as he walked. Besides, the reason why the young couple likes to stick together is because their relationship is good. You can't shake their feelings, yet you insist on forcefully interfering. Just what part of Jinwan is it that you don't like? I've always found this granddaughter-in-law to be very pleasing to the eye. Mo Xiaoza harumphed. Just based on the fact that the Ji family behind her can't compare to the Yin family, she's not qualified. Based on what you're saying, doesn't Jingshan need to marry a foreign princess to be qualified? Princess? Even if you have status but no brains, you're still trash. You've really deified in Shuyan too much. From what I see, all young ladies who are caught up in the conflict of love are all the same. Not many of them are rational. I don't think she's as perfect as you say she is. The human heart is more or less still greedy, it's just that some people hide it too well. Elder Mo harumphed. The old man and Mo Xiaoza had already approached. Their words were right beside their ears, separated by a stone wall behind the crack. Just as Mo Xiaoza was about to walk past them, Jinwan instinctively shrank back, clearly squeezing Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan lowered his gaze to look at her vexed expression. Earlier she had clearly wanted to hide, but now that she knew she couldn't, he smiled and glanced at her teasingly. The old man was walking in front. His eyes swept over the stone crevice. His gaze paused and the walking stick in his hand suddenly fell to the ground, rolling 2 meters backward. Why did my hand suddenly slip? The old man spoke and turned around. I think Jingshan and Jinwan have already left. Stop looking, let's hurry out. Chapter 149. Elder Mo, who had just received the walking stick, suddenly sat on the ground with a putong sound. The walking stick also rolled several meters back. He scolded with a resentful expression. Your old man is already so old. After soaking in the hot spring for so long, my feet are already numb. I don't have any strength in my hands. Why are you looking for trouble for no reason? The more we walk in, the more stuffy it gets. Hurry and help me out. Seeing that the elder had already fallen to the ground, his acting was really too serious. Mo Xiaoza's expression was ugly. Even though he knew what was going on, he couldn't go any further. With a dark face, he picked up his walking stick and helped the old man, who was purposely groaning in pain, out. Only after the 2 of them had walked far away did Jinwan finally relax and lean against Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan sighed with a smile. Why are you hiding? Do you think he won't know if you hide here? He definitely knows. It's so obvious. It would be strange if he doesn't know. But it's still better than being caught on the spot, isn't it? Isn't this the same as avoiding his supercilious glare? Jinwan carefully poked her head out. After confirming that they had really left, she sighed. I didn't expect grandfather to be so good at acting. I also didn't expect you to be so good at hiding. Hiding in a place like this. Mo Jingshan brought her out from the crack in the rock. His words were clearly mocking the fact that the crack in the rock could not hide them at all. Jinwan retorted, isn't it exciting? The man's eyes were fixed on her as he smiled. All right, let's hurry out. Otherwise, if Director Mo comes back later, it would be a waste of grandfather's Oscar-winning acting skills. Jinwan spoke as she held his arm and walked out. At the entrance of the hot spring in the back mountain of the Mo family, Mo Xiaoheng supported Elder Mo out. Seeing Shuyan standing outside, he directly asked, Shuyan, how long have you been out? Have you seen Jingshan? And Shuyan's gaze was unmoved. She only glanced mildly at the entrance of the hot spring. Her mouth said, I haven't seen him. Mo Xiaoza did not miss the glance she had cast earlier. His sharp brows furrowed. Due to the elder's incessant "io" cries of pain, he could not go back to grab them. He could only support the elder and leave with a livid expression. Even when Mo Jingshan and Jinwan came out, and Shuyan still stood in the same spot. Jinwan's gaze landed on Shuyan. And Shuyan only curved her lips indifferently at her before turning to look at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan calmly asked, what time is the flight tomorrow? And Shuyan's expression was no longer as obvious as it had been in the cave. She replied, it's very early. I'll probably have to leave for the airport at dawn. Mo Jingshan nodded lightly. His hand was still around Jinwan's waist, and he took her away without saying anything more. Was lit. Regardless of whether it was her past or past life, Jinwan had never walked on such a quiet path with Mo Jingshan. At this moment, the weariness and loneliness from her past life, as well as the pressure from Father Mo, seemed to have disappeared. The sound of the wind brushed past her ears. Jinwan suddenly held Mo Jingshan's hand tightly. The man sensed a slight change in her. His footsteps paused, lowering his eyes to glance at her. At the same time, Jinwan raised her eyes to smile at him. The little woman's smile curved her eyes. Mo Jingshan looked at her. What's wrong? Jinwan shook her head mysteriously. Women were often emotional creatures. No matter how many lives they had lived, they were no exception. She was only thinking about what he had said earlier. They would be together for the rest of their lives. There would be no divorce. Jinwan tightened her grip on his hand. It was late at night. After all, she had soaked in a hot spring with Chinese medicine. Although it was good for the body, it was normal to feel thirsty. Jinwan was still awake at 11 o'clock. Mo Jingshan was lying by her side, leaning against the headboard. He was reading an email on his phone. Jinwan did not disturb him. She lifted the blanket and got off the bed. She only said, I'll get someone to boil some hot water for us to drink. She then put on a coat over her pajamas and left the room with light footsteps. She was not particularly familiar with the Mo family home. Originally, there should be a helper downstairs who would occasionally come by to see if they needed anything. However, when Jinwan went downstairs, the helper was not around. Jinwan walked out. From afar, she saw that the lights in the front hall were still on. She guessed that the helper would be there and walked over. However, when she entered the front hall, she did not see any helper. She only saw Mo Xiaoza sitting on the sofa with an unpleasant expression. His brows were slightly furrowed. Jinwan saw that his complexion was very bad. It seemed like he was not feeling well. Although she did not want to receive his cold gaze, she still walked over. Mo Xiaoza heard Jinwan's voice and turned to look at her coldly. Why are you here? I wanted to get a helper to boil some water, but I couldn't find anyone. I saw that the lights were on, so I came over. Jinwan approached. Where are you feeling unwell? Mo Xiaoza impatiently furrowed his brows and raised his hand to press his forehead. His tone was neither cold nor warm as he said, I'm getting old and can't stand the hot environment. I soaked in the hot spring for too long and had a headache for the entire night. Jinwan turned back to look at the surroundings. She still did not see any helpers and asked, Are you the only one here? Didn't you get someone to bring medicine over? Is the pain very serious? Do you need to see a doctor? It's an old problem. There's no need to take medicine. Mo Xiaoza placed his hand down and glanced at her with an unkind expression. You don't have to pretend with me. If you want to drink water, go find it somewhere else. Don't stand here and make people sick of you. If not for the fact that he was Mo Jingshan's father, with Jinwan's explosive temper, she would not have tolerated him like this. She would have long lashed out at him, "All right? If your headache is so bad that you can't sleep, why don't I try to help you massage it?" Jin Wan's tone was unhurried. Her calmness carried some patience and politeness toward an elder. Mo Xiao's eyelids twitched, coldly snorting. "You know how to massage? I'll give it a try." Jin Wan did not say more. She walked around the sofa and stood behind him. Without waiting for Mo Xiaoza to coldly reject her, her fingers had already gently pressed against his head. She found the acupuncture point on his head and slowly increased her strength. Mo Xiaoza was silent for a moment. He did not say more, nor did he ask her to scram. He only sat there coldly. A moment later, he narrowed his eyes and said, "You know how to do this? My dad often has headaches, so I've learned a little. It's just that I've never had the chance to help him." Chapter 150. Jin Wan smiled faintly. "How can I stop what others say? I admit that my personality has been spoiled by my father, but that doesn't mean I don't have any redeeming qualities. You've always been at the top. You should understand that in the upper-class circle, others only see the glory on your body. If they find any black marks, they will magnify them and spread them out. They can't wait to tear off your glory and step into the ground. Who would care about your true nature?" Mo Xiaoza closed his eyes and allowed Jin Wan to continue massaging his head. He was silent for a while and did not speak. After massaging for more than 10 minutes, although Jin Wan's hands were sore, she maintained her previous strength. Although she was not a professional, the acupuncture points on his head were easy to find. She pressed them all accurately. "Earlier at the hot spring, you and Jingshen were both inside," Mo Xiaoza suddenly said. His tone was cold and heavy. Jin Wan did not stop massaging his head. She calmly replied, "Yes." "You sure?" answered quickly. "Back then weren't you still hiding?" He coldly reprimanded. "I knew you would find out and I didn't mean to offend you. I just subconsciously didn't want to have any conflict with you, so I hid." Jin Wan took the opportunity when his attitude was not so distant to say, "You should be able to tell that my marriage with Jingshen is very harmonious. Our relationship is also very good. Today at the hot spring in the back mountain, we were indeed together the entire time. But isn't this only natural? Who gave you the courage to say the words 'only natural' to me?" I didn't agree. "What do you mean by 'only natural'?" Mo Xiaoza still did not lower his face and his tone was not pleasant. "I know you have your own views. And Shuyan and I are indeed not the same kind of people. She is used to her strict and planned life, while I am a very casual person. I do what I should do and say what I should say. Although I live a simple life, it doesn't mean I am blind and stupid." Jin Wan smiled and gradually put down her hand. She gently pressed one side and said, "And Shuyan and I are not the same kind of people. It's useless no matter how you put it. Jingshen also has a strict and planned life. Since young, he has been the Mo family's most favored successor." Mo Xiaoza coldly snorted. Jin Wan curved her lips. "You've never truly compared me to An Shuyan. You only firmly believe that she and Jingshen belong to the same world. Isn't this something that everyone can see? In what way can you compare to Shu Yan?" Although his head was indeed much more relaxed after being pressed by her, Mo Xiaoza seemed to be at loggerheads with her. "Using in Shu Yan's merits to compare with the so-called Jin Wan you heard from others, is this fair?" Jin Wan's attitude was calm, and there was a smile in her eyes. Her tone remained indifferent and quiet. "Indeed, it is very unfair." A clear voice came from the back door of the front hall. Jin Wan looked back and saw that Mo Jingshen had come out. She didn't know how long he had been standing there watching and listening. Hearing Mo Jingshen's movements, Mo Xiaoza abruptly turned around. Mo Jingshen was only wearing soft and comfortable home clothes. Although he did not look as strict and noble as he usually did, his casual appearance was closer to the so-called simplicity that Jin Wan had mentioned. It was clear that he had discovered that Jin Wan had not returned. He did not even put on a jacket and directly went downstairs to look for Jin Wan. At the end of the day, in the end, don't you still have to rely on Jingshen to support you?" The moment Mo Xiaoza saw Mo Jingshen, it was as though his supreme authority had been thoroughly challenged. His expression turned cold once more. Mo Jingshen slowly walked in, speaking indifferently, "From start to finish, I've always been the one to protect her. I'm unwilling to see her suffer too much. I'm her husband. Isn't it only right for me to support her? For this woman, I've asked you to return to America to take over Shine several times, but you never agreed. What future can you have if you stay in Haicheng and guard your own Mo corporation? The Mo family's foundation is all in Shine. Your future also belongs to Shine." Mo Xiaoza appeared to be angered by Mo Jingshan's indifferent attitude and angrily rebuked him. Mo Jingshan did not respond. His gaze was indifferent. What kind of attitude is this? Is this the attitude you should have toward a father? Even now, I still don't understand the reason why you suddenly left America. After returning to the country, you established your own business because of your own ability. If you have the ability, I won't say anything. But you suddenly married Jin Wan, and you didn't even tell me. Do you even have any respect for your father? The moment Mo Xiaoza met Mo Jingshan's indifferent expression, he angrily scolded while picking up the teacup on the coffee table opposite the sofa. He abruptly smashed it heavily toward Mo Jingshan. Jin Wan almost instinctively ran over and decisively moved forward to block Mo Jingshan. The swiftly flying teacup smashed harshly against her thigh. Mo Xiaoza had really thrown the teacup with all his strength. This time the pain caused Jin Wan's entire leg to go numb. To throw it so harshly, he really could be so ruthless toward his own son. Mo Jingshan originally did not dodge. Jin Wan's charge was too sudden, and the teacup was smashed over in the blink of an eye. He abruptly tugged Jin Wan aside, glancing at her with furrowed brows before looking at her leg. Jin Wan was only smashed once and did not feel much. She endured the pain and raised her head to look at him. She shook her head and softly said, "It's all right, it's all right. You sure have the courage to block." Mo Xiaoza narrowed his eyes and harumphed coldly. Mo Jingshan's ink-black eyes were like a boundless night that had been baptized by a tornado. He glanced at Mo Xiaoza, his handsome face clear and cold. He directly pulled Jin Wan behind him, his low and heavy voice mild and indifferent. "Don't you know why I left America?" Mo Xiaoza coldly met his gaze. It was clear that his anger was unquenchable, yet he was suppressing his temper. "Aside from in Shuyin, have you ever put in any less effort by my side? Back then, when I was recovering from my heavy injuries in Los Angeles, what did you do?" Mo Jingshan's tone was low and cold. Right now, his eyes were filled with a coldness that Jin Wan had never seen before. Mo Jingshan was in Los Angeles. Heavily injured. Los Angeles? She had been to this place before. When she was studying in America, the city she stayed the longest in was Los Angeles. A blurry memory seemed to flash past her mind, but she did not manage to grasp it. Mo Xiaoza's sudden angry words drew all of her attention away. "What does that matter have to do with you staying in High City?" Mo Xiaoza angrily asked. However, the moment he finished speaking, Mo Xiaoza's figure suddenly paused. His gaze abruptly shifted toward Jin Wan, who was shielded behind Mo Jingshan. He coldly stared at her for a long time before suddenly narrowing his eyes as though he had thought of something. He coldly asked, "It's her?" Jin Wan's eyelids instantly twitched. What was her? Chapter 151. Mo Jingshan's expression remained cold as he slowly spoke. "I don't need anyone to tell me what to do in my life, even if it's my biological father." Mo Xiaoza glared at him, but his gaze shifted to Jin Wan, who he had been protecting behind him. He suddenly furrowed his brows, narrowed his eyes and coldly said, "You've hardened your heart to go against me." Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear him. He turned back to look at Jin Wan, gently caressing her leg. "Does it still hurt?" Of course it hurt. Right now it was most likely bruised. But with her pajamas covering it, no one could see it. Jin Wan's expression did not change. "It's all right. It's already been so long. It doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a blow to my leg. Don't worry. It's my negligence." Mo Jingshan held her hand, gently caressing her fingers. This kind of thing will never happen again. What Jin Wan cared about was not whether her leg hurt or not, but that she could sense the hostility between the father and son. This man, Mo Jingshan, was really too good at hiding his emotions. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. She actually only realized the huge problem between them now. That. Jin Wan abruptly raised her head to say, "The Ji family's foundation is indeed not as solid as Miss N's family, but it's still a reputable figure in Haicheng. If it's just because of the difference in status, I can work hard to make up for it. The Mo family doesn't lack things like money and power. Isn't it my ability that you want to see?" Mo Xiaoza glanced at her, coldly saying, "At least you have some self-awareness. I know you bought 2 companies from someone else and even merged them into some studio. Let's not talk about whether Jing Shin has invested in your studio. Let's talk about yourself. Even with such good resources, I don't see you earning a single cent. What right do you have to stand here and talk to me?" Hearing these words, Jin Wan smiled. The property industry had already stagnated this year. There was still a period of time to observe the market. She chose to wait and accumulate. If she did not hold it in now, how could she possibly double her capital in the future? But hearing Mo Xiao's words, it could be said that he had pointed out a bright path for her. She didn't know if it was because her attitude just now was commendable that Mo Xiao's attitude was no longer as stubborn as before. It sounds like you've already made plans. It's also a rare honor for me to grow step by step under the witness of the chairman of Shine Group, Jinwan said. Mo Xiaoza narrowed his eyes and glanced at her fearless gaze. Do you know how much liquidity Shine Corporation has every minute? It's $10 million. Mo Xiaoza said coldly, it's almost equivalent to 70 million renminbi. I'll give you a week, can you earn it? Jinwan pressed Mo Jingshan's raised hand hard and replied generously, all right, if I can't make it in a week, don't kick me out. I'll sign the divorce agreement and send it to you in America. Jinwan? Mo Jingshan abruptly spoke up coldly. Jinwan turned to look at him, smiling at him. I can't. Trust me. Mo Jingshan stared at her, his gaze quiet and heavy. Without a word, he brought her out of the living room. Mo Xiaoza stood in the living room, coldly narrowing his eyes. 70 million in a week, this sort of condition was too simple. He had only said a few words of mockery, but Jinwan had strangely tied a dead knot on this 70 million. Realizing that for a moment earlier Jinwan had purposely led him into a trap, Mo Xiaoza's originally ugly expression became even worse. Jinwan was brought out by Mo Jingshan. The moment they stepped out of the living room, Jinwan said, don't worry about me. It's only 70 million. Not asking him to give me a price tag of 700 million is already the best outcome for me. Mo Jingshan looked at her and was silent for several seconds before saying, the 300,000 square meters of empty land near Shimin Square can be sold. Jinwan, how did he know that she had this intention from the start? The man did not look at the astonishment in her eyes. He calmly said, the properties and land under your studio's name are all close to the city's planned public square. There are business opportunities everywhere. You've always been passionate about your studio, and your mind is clear. You know how to prepare well. Why would I worry? Seeing that her gaze was still slightly dazed, Mo Jingshan only caressed her hair. His tone was gentle and low. That piece of land was purchased by Han Tianyuan for 200 million a year ago. Right now it's under your studio's name. In the past year there hasn't been any opportunity to raise the price. Many people thought that this piece of land had fallen into their hands and was destined to lose money. Jinwan raised her head from the man's face. You even know about such things. Is there anything about me that you don't know? Mo Jingshan raised her chin, his black eyes fixated on hers. His tone was casual and casual. I'm also thinking, is there anything about you that I don't know? Jinwan felt a chill run down her spine from his gaze. Everything from her past life was still vivid in her mind. She raised her hand to touch her ear, avoiding his piercing gaze. Towards Mo Xiaoza's conditions, Jinwan gladly accepted them. After all, it was one thing to be protected by Mo Jingshan and the elder, but it was another thing to have a chance to speak up in front of Mo Xiaoza. That's right. That piece of land had always been looked down upon. Back then it was still in Han Tianyuan's hands. Because of that piece of land he had a huge debt with the bank. Even now, the unsettled debt was still attached to her studio. Jinwan kept delaying it, so everyone thought that she was unable to sell it. Do you know about the city plan that the city government has yet to release? Jinwan asked. Mo Jingshan curved his lips. His smile was indifferent. I know. This isn't strange. The Mo Corporation has an inseparable relationship with Hai Cheng's business and political circles. But this city plan that had yet to be released, Jinwan also knew that this was not logical. Mo Jingshan did not ask. He only looked at her. Jinwan averted her eyes, saying seriously, the square will be rebuilt. The city hall's main building will also be moved there. All the land and buildings nearby will skyrocket overnight. Thus, Jinwan had calculated clearly that within a week she would be able to earn it all back. This was also within her original plan. While not disrupting her plans, she could also take the opportunity to bargain with Mo Xiaoza. Could be considered killing two birds with one stone. Seeing the faint flicker of light in her eyes, Mo Jingshan looked at her and said, "Come here." Chapter 152. Mo Jingshan could tell that she was relaxed and confident. He held her waist and pulled her into his embrace. His words were low and carried a hint of warning. In the future, no matter what happens, don't run in front of me to block me. Remember this, do you hear me? Jinwan smiled. In that situation, even if it was a knife, she would still rush over instinctively, much less a teacup. Mo Jingshan brought her back to the room and had the helper bring over some medicinal wine. He then had her sit by the bed and personally helped her massage the fist-sized bruise on her thigh. Jinwan looked at him, asking, "Have you lived in Los Angeles for a long time?" Mo Jingshan's hand paused on her thigh for a moment, but it was only for the blink of an eye. He then continued to pour out the yellowing medicinal wine to massage her thigh. "When I was studying in America, I lived in Los Angeles. I stayed there for about 2 to 3 years. Jinwan stared at him. "Have we met?" Mo Jingshan stood up, closing the bottle of medicinal wine and casually placing it by the side. He turned back to look at her. "What do you think?" she said. The things that happened in America back then, her memories were really blurry. After all, so many years had passed in her previous life. How could she have the mood to recall her teenage years? Now that she thought about it, she could not remember when she had met Mo Jingshan. A man like him would leave a deep impression on any woman with a single glance. Even though Jinwan had grown up in the upper class and was used to seeing all kinds of outstanding men, if she had met Mo Jingshan before, she would definitely not forget him. "I don't think so," Jinwan muttered to herself. Mo Jingshan watched her, his gaze dark and deep. At the same time, in the Ji family's villa. It was already late at night. Ji Mingran's room was still brightly lit, but the atmosphere was stifling. Earlier she had called in Xu Yan. However, and Xu Yan's tone was cold. "Second Miss Ji, you don't have to vainly hope to obtain any benefits from me. The relationship between us has never been one of cooperation. In the future, don't call me again." After that, the call was hung up. Originally, she wanted to use Xu Yan as a sharp blade to successfully push Jinwan away from Mo Jingshan's side. However, she did not expect that Xu Yan would return to America so soon. The reason she called her was to find out the current situation between Mo Jingshan and Jinwan. In the end, she heard such words that kept her 1,000 miles away. Clearly, this Xu Yan was the same as her, wishing for Jinwan to immediately disappear from this world. Yet, she insisted on pretending to be insufferably arrogant. Who was she showing her arrogance to? Returning to the United States was tantamount to retreating in defeat. As a loser, he pretended to be very virtuous. What surprised her even more was that Mo Jingshan's father's intervention failed to shake Jinwan's status as Mrs. Mo. If Jinwan was more suspicious, or if she was still as spoiled as before, she would definitely argue with Mo Jingshan. However, Jinwan had always been so calm. She did not even make a fuss once. Previously, Ji Mingran had always thought that Jinwan would definitely lose completely against a tough opponent like Xu Yan. However, right now, with this unexpected result, she really did not have any confidence. Not to mention that Jinwan's current personality was something she could not understand. Furthermore, with Mo Jingshan around, no matter what happened, it would be difficult to harm Jinwan. In front of the Mo family, Shine Group's chairman could not use too forceful methods to force her. After all, there was still the elder. Mo Xiaoza was sandwiched between Elder Mo and Mo Jingshan. There were many things that he could not do even if he wanted to. After all, the person standing by Jinwan's side was none other than Mo Jingshan. That man had a coldness that could cause one's bones to quench with fear. He did not make a sound, but it seeped into every corner. 2 days later, early in the morning, Ji Hongwen discovered that Ji Mingran appeared as though she had not slept for several nights. Ever since she purposely targeted Jinwan at the Mo family, Ji Hongwen had been strict with her. However, it was clear that while he could control her, he could not control her heart. He abruptly said coldly, "You're eating with such a long face. Your father is still alive. Who are you crying for?" Ji Mingran was startled by the sudden words. She almost dropped the chopsticks in her hand. She raised her eyes to say, "Dad, I couldn't sleep for the past 2 nights. That's why. You can't sleep because you've done too many shameful things," Ji Hongwen coldly said. Ji Mingran secretly bit her lips. She endured the grievance and lowered her head to shove a mouthful of rice into her mouth. In the past, when Jinwan was at home, her father would often compare her with Jinwan, praising her for always accompanying him at home. He praised her for being gentle, knowing how to respect her elders, and for not going against him. His words were filled with praise for her and instigation of Jinwan. But now Ji Mingran unwillingly placed her bowl down. Under Ji Hongwen's glare, she had no choice but to pick it up and continue eating. However, the food was tasteless and her stomach was filled with anger. "Old Ji, don't blame Mingran. It's fine if you scolded her a while ago, but do you want to make things difficult for her for the rest of your life? Jinwan isn't an outsider. Both of them are your daughters. The Mo family's matter has been in the past for a long time. It's about time we move on, Shinharu gently persuaded. Ji Hongwen coldly scolded, do you think you're very clean? Do you really think I don't know what happened when you took away the chessboard? Without your help, would Menggran have the ability to enter my study to take something? Shinharu smiled at him as though she was begging for forgiveness. Her gaze then shifted to Ji Menggran, warning her not to cause any more trouble in front of her father. After finishing the meal under Ji Hongwen's cold gaze, Ji Menggran's heart was still burning with anger. While Ji Hongwen was at the company, Ji Menggran slipped out. She could not return to the Yu Garden, and she was unable to find out where Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan were staying. The only thing she knew was that Jin Wan's studio was in Jin Lin Building. She decided to take a taxi there. Entering Jin Lin Building, she arrived at the floor where Emon Wan's studio was located. Seeing the words Emon Wan's studio, Ji Menggran's expression was calm, but her heart was about to vomit. Just as she was about to enter, she was abruptly blocked by a tall, skinny, short-haired woman. Who are you? Ji Menggran was startled by this short-haired woman's cold aura. She took a step back, asking with a confused expression. Feng Ling did not speak, only coldly staring at her, not letting her in. Are you the receptionist of this studio or some small employee? You dare to block my way? Do you know who I am? Ji Menggran was extremely displeased at being ignored so coldly. Feng Ling expressionlessly cut her off. COMO has instructed that the Ji family's second miss and dogs are not to approach within 10 meters of Mrs. Mo. Chapter 153. What did you say? Do you dare to say it again? Ji Menggran was enraged. Feng Ling's gaze was cold. As she wished, she repeated, the Ji family's second miss and her dog are not allowed to come within 10 meters of Mrs. Mo. You're so daring. Ji Menggran did not expect her to be so daring. She was so angry that she was about to throw her bag at her. In the end, the short-haired woman in front of her nimbly blocked her wrist. She then abruptly twisted it backward, almost breaking Ji Menggran's wrist. She cried out in pain. Ah! To prevent the noise from disturbing Jin Wan, who was in the middle of a meeting, Feng Ling retracted her hand when Ji Menggran's face was pale from the pain. At the same time, she harshly pushed her 2 meters away. Scram! Feng Ling directly chased her away. Ji Menggran had just arrived and was immediately given such a harsh slap at the door. She was so angry that her entire body was trembling. This woman was the bodyguard Mo Jingshan arranged for Jin Wan? It was just a small matter that happened in the Mo family, and now Mo Jingshan actually did not even allow her to approach Jin Wan. Exactly how precious was Jin Wan? Did he need to protect her so carefully? Wasn't she just a vixen who relied on the beauty of Hai Cheng's #1 socialite? Since you recognize me, you should know what kind of people the Ji family has in Hai Cheng. You actually dared to be so heavy-handed against me? I don't care who sent you. Do you believe that I won't sue you? Ji Menggran rubbed her wrist that was almost broken. The skin on her wrist was slightly red. She glared at the short-haired woman angrily. There has never been a bodyguard who dared to treat me like this. Feng Ling appeared as though she did not hear anything. She continued to stand there, maintaining her cold indifference. Ji Menggran did not believe her and continued to walk forward. However, before she could approach, Feng Ling's cold gaze abruptly swept toward her. That gaze landed directly on Ji Menggran's reddened wrist, as though if she dared to take another step closer, she would really break it. Ji Menggran's expression did not soften, but her heart instinctively trembled. She paused and hesitated for a moment. Her gaze then turned toward the glass door of the studio. Feng Ling turned slightly to the side expressionlessly, blocking her view. She did not even give her a chance to look in. Although Ji Menggran was angry, she still kept her guard up. She didn't confront him head-on. She angrily turned around and walked out. Ever since she was slapped by Jin Wan, Ji Menggran's heart was still somewhat fearful and had not met Jin Wan again. Previously, he had wanted to use the opportunity of Shuyan coming to Haicheng from America to fan the flames, but in the end, he still did not gain any benefits. She wanted to see what was going on with Jin Wan. Could it be that there really was an expert by her side giving her pointers? There must be something wrong with this. Boss Nguyen, the leaders of the City Hall's land office have already gone to Ximin Square for an inspection. Xiaoba ran into Jin Wan's office to report. Jin Wan glanced at the time and stood up to pick up the car keys. Let's go take a look. Xiaoba held the prepared materials in her hands and followed Jin Wan out of the studio. Just as Jin Wan's car was about 100 meters away from the parking lot, a taxi followed behind. Ji Menggran sat in the car and said to the driver, "Follow them." Keep following them. Maintain a distance and don't get discovered. Ji Mingran then realized that Jin Wan was acting strangely. Usually, Jin Wan did not need to go to any social events. Her car was not heading in the direction of the U Garden, nor was it heading to the MO Corporation. Could it be that she was heading back to her new residence? Right now Jin Wan was too guarded. Furthermore, they had already shed all pretense of cordiality. Ji Mingran could not brazenly approach her and could only follow quietly, waiting for an opportunity to make a move. In the car in front, Feng Ling drove. At the same time, she casually glanced at the rearview mirror. The car suddenly sped up. Xiao Ba sat in the front passenger seat and handed the materials in her hands to Jin Wan. "Boss, these are the approval materials that we'll be showing to the land office's leader. Take a look. I've carefully sorted through them. There shouldn't be any problems." Jin Wan took them and lowered her head to read them carefully, as though she was completely unaware of the situation behind the car. Feng Ling's driving skills were very good. She cleverly turned the car into the intersection on the side and quickly passed it. Although she drove very steadily, the sudden speed was too fast. Xiao Ba, who was sitting in front, asked in confusion, "Why are you suddenly driving so fast?" Feng Ling did not speak. Her cold eyes were still indifferently glancing at the situation in the rearview mirror. Jin Wan continued to read the materials in her hands without batting an eyelid. She did not make a sound or even ask a question. Ji Mingran noticed that their car had sped up. Could it be that they had been discovered? Did Jin Wan really have an unspeakable secret that she was afraid of being seen by others? Could it be that Jin Wan was going to meet someone? Could it be someone that even Mo Jingshan didn't know? Ji Mingran threw another 200 yuan to the driver, ordering, "Chase after them." The driver received the money and stepped hard on the accelerator. However, no matter how fast the taxi was, it could not compare to Jin Wan's Mercedes-Benz. It was left far behind, but the driver continued to madly chase after them. Jin Wan's car did not stop even when it passed by Ximin Square. Xiao Ba called out from the car, "Aya, we've arrived, we've arrived. Why aren't you stopping?" Feng Ling ignored Xiao Ba's chatter and continued to speed up expressionlessly. After Jin Wan finished reading the materials in her hands, she raised her head and said calmly, "Continue driving. Make a few more turns." Hearing this, Feng Ling's eyes immediately brightened. She followed her words and continued driving. This time she chose a remote road. The car took more than an hour on the road. When they left the studio, it was already past 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now it was 5:30 in the evening. The abandoned areas around High City that had been demolished for a long time were covered in dust. Every path was excessively dark. Ji Mingran increasingly felt that Jin Wan must have something she could not tell anyone. Otherwise she would not have driven so fast. She urged them to chase after them. When they neared the abandoned area, all of a sudden, Jin Wan's car drove into the corner ahead. When the car chased after it, it could not be seen at all. Where did it go? The driver's expression was confused. There were 2 roads ahead, and it was impossible to tell which direction the car had gone. This place is filled with broken walls and tiles. The further in we go, the smaller the road becomes. No matter how agile that car is, it can't have gone too far, Ji Mingran said. "I'll go in to take a look. Stop the car here and wait for me." After alighting from the car, Ji Mingran felt that Jin Wan was too strange. What was she doing here? Chapter 154. Ji Mingran took out her phone from her bag. She planned to take a picture of Jin Wan the moment she saw anything wrong with her and bring it back to Mo Jingshan. However, even after walking for a long time, she did not hear any sound. The car could not drive in any further. Since the car did not come out, it could not continue driving in. Where exactly was it parked? The paths in the ruins twisted and turned, like a small maze. Ji Mingran walked in for more than 10 minutes before reaching the end of the road. The sky was getting darker and darker and she felt uneasy. She turned around and started to walk back. Just as she was about to turn on the flashlight function on her phone to light up the road ahead, a tall and thin figure suddenly appeared from behind a wall and blocked her way. Ji Mingran was startled and froze in her steps. She raised her eyes to see that it was the female bodyguard who blocked her way outside the studio today. She immediately felt a chill run down her spine. Earlier in the parking lot, she did not notice that there was someone else in Jin Wan's car. From afar, she only saw Jin Wan's car being driven away and immediately followed. She did not expect this female bodyguard to be here as well. "You." Ji Mingran quickly took a step back under Feng Ling's cold gaze. "Mingran, are you following me?" She had just taken 2 steps back when she abruptly heard Jin Wan's voice from behind. It was very close. Ji Mingran abruptly stiffened. Her body trembled and she almost did not have the courage to turn around to look at her. She then glanced at the female bodyguard before her and finally realized that she had been played by Jin Wan. Feng Ling stood before her and did not speak. She only had a cold smile on her face. As Ji Mingran froze in panic and almost lost her grip on her phone, Feng Ling suddenly reached out and harshly knocked on Ji Mingran's wrist. Ji Mingran's arm immediately felt numb and stinging pain. Her phone fell from her palm. Feng Ling quickly caught it and casually slipped it into her pocket. "What are you doing? Return my phone." Ji Mingran was shocked and rushed forward to snatch it back. However, how could she match up to Feng Ling's speed? The moment she rushed forward, the short-haired woman had already taken 2 steps back, causing her to almost fall to the ground. Ji Mingran forced herself to stand firm, suppressing the uneasiness in her heart. She thought for a moment and turned back. Seeing Jin Wan standing behind her with a calm and indifferent expression, she subconsciously tightened her grip. Seeing Ji Mingran's frightened expression, Jin Wan indifferently curved her lips. When she left the studio, she knew there was a car following her. She had heard from Feng Ling that Ji Mingran had gone to look for her during the day. She could guess that Ji Mingran must have been too suspicious, so she followed them quietly. Ji Mingran's thirst for knowledge was too strong. After chasing for so long, she didn't even consider if there would be any danger. She just kept following him like this. Jin Wan smiled coldly. "You've been following me for so long. Have you found anything?" Right now, Ji Mingran could no longer treat Jin Wan as the original Jin Wan. She cautiously and fearfully explained, "Big sister, don't misunderstand. Dad said that you started your own studio and was worried that you wouldn't be able to handle it, so he asked me to come over to help. In the end, I was blocked outside by your people." As she spoke, Ji Mingran cautiously glanced at the female bodyguard. Feng Ling coldly watched her. Ji Mingran's gaze faltered, and she rushed to face Jin Wan. "Earlier on, I was near your studio. When I saw your car leave, I followed out of curiosity. After all, Dad said that he was worried that you'd lose all the money you've invested. He was also afraid that you'd meet with trouble in such a scheming business and that you'd embarrass the Ji family, so I followed to take a look." Jin Wan crossed her arms, smiling mildly at her, but did not speak. Even though she knew how clumsy her excuse was, Ji Mingran could only force herself to continue. Even though the sky was dark and the wind was cold, Ji Mingran's body was already covered in cold sweat. "A little sister who can't wait for me to embarrass myself in front of the Mo family, but now, just because of a few words from Dad, she specially came to show concern for me?" Jin Wan raised her brows slightly, smiling. "So, it turns out that Dad is worried that I'll embarrass him. It seems like I should give him a call tonight to have a good chat. I should at least give him some peace of mind." The moment she heard that she was going to give her father a call, Ji Mingran's expression immediately stiffened. "Big sister, I know that I was wrong about the matter at the Mo family. After Dad returned, he scolded me and locked me up at home for many days." Ji Mingran spoke as though she had been wronged. "If it weren't for Auntie Shen pleading for me, I might not have been able to leave the house until now. Please forgive me, okay? Besides, you didn't suffer any harm from that incident. After all, the two of us are blood-related sisters. Why do you have to keep harping on such a small matter?" Jin Wan calmly watched her, her tone slowly dragging out. "Forgive? Just like when I was young, you secretly took my favorite dress to wear. After you dirtied it, you begged me to forgive you, but the next day, you refused to repent and continued to steal my other dresses?" Seeing that Jin Wan could still bring up their childhood, Ji Mingran took the opportunity to say, "Big sister, we're blood-related sisters. We lost our mothers when we were so young. We grew up together, enough." Jin Wan had long lost her patience with her. "I don't have the mood to act like sisters with you." Ji Mingran's expression trembled. She knew that Jin Wan really did not intend to give her any face. She directly shouted at her angrily, "Ever since you married into the Mo family, you've become completely arrogant, haven't you? First, you strangely forbade me from going to the U garden. Then, you guarded against me time and time again. When I returned to the Ji family, you even targeted me. I was unhappy in my heart. That's why I wanted to embarrass you at the Mo family that time. Yet, you still bear a grudge against me. Ji Mingran, your ability to be a thief crying thief is really great." Jin Wan lightly mocked. "Don't you know why I forbade you from going to the U garden?" Ji Mingran's expression did not change, but her gaze was guarded as she watched Jin Wan. "Do you think that Mo Jingshan would read the messages you sent him? How many times do you think I've taken the medicine prescribed by that so-called psychiatrist? Do you think those little tricks of yours are so secretive? Jinwan lowered her eyes and sneered. Ji Minggran was startled. Her lips moved, but she could not find any words to explain. Just like that, Jinwan approached her and looked at this so-called blood-related sister from a very close distance. Then, her lips revealed an unfathomable and cold smile. Chapter 155. Feng Ling nimbly pushed Ji Minggran behind the rubble. Without waiting for Ji Minggran to scream again, Jinwan expressionlessly turned to leave. Ji Minggran was heavily pushed against the stone wall. Her back hurt from the impact. Her face was pale and frightened as she stared at the short-haired woman in front of her. I'm warning you, don't touch me. If you dare to do anything to me here, do you believe that I won't sue you? Even if I sue all 18 generations of your ancestors, they won't be able to rest in peace. Feng Ling coldly glanced at her. I haven't even made a move. What are you screaming for? Ji Minggran's face instantly turned red and white. Her hands gripped her clothes tightly, afraid that she would be beaten. She was so nervous that even her knuckles turned white. Don't be afraid. Mrs. Mo doesn't intend to take your life. Feng Ling held back a cold smile. But second Miss Ji, your thirst for knowledge is too strong. I can't possibly let you follow me for nothing. Since you're already here, don't be in a rush to leave. What do you mean? Ji Minggran's lips trembled from the coldness in her eyes. Feng Ling took out Ji Minggran's phone that she had previously placed in her pocket. Ji Minggran glanced at it and reached out to snatch it back. Return it to me. However, before her hand could touch it, the phone slipped from Feng Ling's hand. She could not catch it in time and it fell heavily to the ground. Ji Minggran knew that something was wrong and rushed to pick it up. However, the phone was abruptly stepped on by Feng Ling's foot. The sound of the screen shattering could be heard from under her feet. Ji Minggran watched this scene and her entire body turned cold. She slowly raised her eyes and resisted the urge to cry. Her body trembled as she stood up and leaned back cautiously. In an instant, she bumped into the stone wall behind her. Do you know what this place is? Feng Ling's tone was still cold. Ji Minggran subconsciously scanned the surroundings and answered guiltily, this is a small area that was demolished a long time ago. Feng Ling was very tall and looked down at her. After so many years, no developer has come to rebuild it. Second Miss Ji, have you never heard of the reason? Ji Minggran's expression gradually changed from fear to alarm. She abruptly raised her eyes to look at Feng Ling. If she remembered correctly, this was a new neighborhood built a few years ago. Many people had successfully moved in, but not long after, there were rumors of hauntings and frequent strange occurrences, causing many people to quickly move out. Back then, the unscrupulous developers had occupied the unmarked graveyard area of High City from 100 years ago. However, after the baptism of time, many people had forgotten the original purpose of this land, so they bought houses here. But in the past, there were often rumors that this place was haunted, and no one dared to go near it. Later, because everyone moved away and because the rumors of the strange incidents became worse and worse, the place was demolished. Until now, no developer dared to come and occupy this piece of land. Right now, the place they were standing on was the unmarked graveyard from 100 years ago, and the stone walls that had been torn apart. The weather forecast says it's going to rain tonight. Did Miss Ji bring an umbrella? Otherwise, if you stay here alone, it won't be good if you catch a cold from the rain. As Feng Ling spoke, she decisively snatched the bag from Ji Minggran's hands. She opened the zipper and turned the bag upside down, pouring all the things inside onto the ground. She then lowered her eyes to look at the various cosmetics and bank cards inside. She laughed coldly and casually kicked them a few times. She smiled faintly. You really didn't bring an umbrella. It seems like you can only be drenched by the rain. What do you mean I'll stay here alone? Ji Minggran's back was cold and her lips were pale from fright. She could no longer care about the things in her bag. Not really alone. Feng Ling suddenly smiled coldly and evilly glanced at her. Tonight, perhaps many people will float out from the ground to accompany you. So, second Miss Ji, you don't have to be too afraid. What exactly do you want? I don't want to be here. Scram. Let me go. Ji Minggran was so frightened that all the hair on her body stood up. She screamed and reached out to push her away to escape. Feng Ling avoided her hand and grabbed her wrist, heavily pushing Ji Minggran back against the stone wall. This is the simplest warning. In the future, if you dare to follow Mrs. Mo again, I'm afraid it won't be as simple as being thrown here for a night. Feng Ling coldly said, Second Miss Ji, I hope you have a good time tonight. What are you doing? Come back. Give me your cell phone. Ji Minggran was afraid that she would really be thrown here. Right now, she had nothing in her hands and it was impossible for her to hail a taxi in this area. She pounced over like a madwoman to grab her. In the end, she was mercilessly flung back by Feng Ling. She staggered backward and fell onto the ground. Several minutes later, Feng Ling returned to the car and said to Jin Wan, "Mrs. Mo, we can leave now." Xiao Ba was still unclear of the situation, but seeing Jin Wan's cold and thoughtful expression, she did not dare to ask. When Feng Ling returned, she glanced at the time and softly said, "Boss Nguyen, the people at Ximin Square should still be there. Are we still going?" "Yes." Jin Wan closed the documents in her hands. "Let's go." Ji Minggran struggled to stand up with much difficulty. She walked forward step by step, wanting to return to the taxi she had taken earlier. However, the ruins were truly like a maze. She searched for a long time before she finally found it. However, the taxi had already driven away out of patience. The sky had already darkened completely. It was indeed raining at night, and the originally dark sky was now covered with dark clouds. Gusts of cold wind blew from behind her, accompanied by the sharp sound of the wind coming from the cracks in the dilapidated stone walls. Each sound was more terrifying than the one before. Ji Minggran was so frightened that her face was drained of all color. She frantically ran out, but even when she reached the wide road, she still could not see a single car passing by. This was originally the most desolate and abandoned place in Haicheng. Usually no one would pass by here. The highway to Haicheng was also not here, and very few cars would use this road. The moment she thought of how Jin Wan had purposely bypassed half of Haicheng just to bring her here, Ji Minggran hatefully yelled at the dark ruins, "Jin Wan, just you wait." The surroundings were so quiet that there was not even a single echo. Only the sound of the wind blew from behind her. The cold rain landed on her face bit by bit. Ji Minggran was so cold that she hugged her chest tightly. She cautiously and fearfully turned back to look at the ruins that had been demolished. She had previously heard that this place was haunted. The various frightening things that happened late at night caused her legs to weaken. Chapter 156. After returning to Ximin Square, Jin Wan successfully received the approval document from the National Land Office. "Boss, since the surrounding land and housing prices are rising, should we sell off the properties nearby as well?" Xiao Ba asked. Jin Wan sat quietly in the car looking at the rain outside the window. She calmly replied, "Not selling." "What?" "It's not easy to wait for an opportunity to raise the price. If we don't sell now, we'll suffer losses like before." Jin Wan chuckled and glanced at Xiao Ba. "You see, I've recently used the MO Corporation's funds to purchase a few pieces of land that are extremely expensive. I'm so worried that I can't even sleep, am I right?" Xiao Ba grinned, nodding her head. However, she still said, "But I believe in boss's intuition. Since you dare to do it, you definitely have your reasons. At least you know how to talk." Jin Wan chuckled. She knew that she would definitely earn money, but she could not be too reckless. If she relied on her ability to predict the future and seized all the opportunities, she would only become the target of everyone else. In this ruthless business world, how many people became rich overnight, and how many people were immediately targeted by others? With every step, they would be hindered by their peers as though they were walking on the edge of a knife. What Jin Wan needed to do was to carry her ambition in this prosperous era, and walk steadily step by step. Every share of the soup must be kept safely in her own pocket, and would not be eaten away by any enemies. What she needed to do was to gradually develop the studio into a property brand company that belonged to her. Bit by bit, she would turn the funds in her hands into several times the profits. She needed to have the ability to support herself and the Ji family. She needed to do better and no longer need to be shielded by Mo Jingshan. What she needed to do was to be able to shield Mo Jingshan from the wind and rain one day. All of a sudden, Xiao Ba pointed at the laptop on her lap, shouting, "Boss, look at the company's email. YJ Group said they want to buy the land beside Ximin Square. They offered 200 million yuan. They even sent such an official company email. That's 200 million yuan, isn't this the same price that CEO Han bought it for? They actually didn't make a loss. Boss, how did you guess it? You're too amazing. When I received the documents earlier, I was worried that no one would accept your offer, but there really is someone who wants it." Jin Wan raised her brows, speaking calmly, "Use the company's name to reply with an official email. Be polite and don't offend them. Tell them that we don't accept the price of 200 million yuan. If they are sincere, they can come to the studio to discuss with me." "Why not?" Previously, no one would buy that piece of land for less than 200 million. Now we can finally recoup our losses. Boss, aren't you planning to sell it? Just do as I say. Jinwan calmly glanced at her. Xiaoba saw Jinwan's calm and composed expression. Although she didn't quite understand, her heart ached as if it was cutting her flesh. She was afraid that she would lose this rare opportunity to recoup her losses, but after all, Jinwan was the boss, so she had to do as she was told. Glancing at Xiaoba's sulky expression, Jinwan just smiled and didn't say anything more. In Jinwan's impression, 10 years later, the largest building complex in Haicheng Shimin Square would be located on the land in her hands. The developer would be the country's famous real estate company, BGY Group. If history was not wrong with BGY's accurate foresight, he would definitely not miss out on this prime location and would definitely appear. The price would not be as simple as 200 million. After getting the approval documents, Jinwan naturally attended a dinner party jointly held by the city hall and the business community. Today Jinwan wore an off-shoulder nude evening gown. Her face was lightly made up. She was already attractive and right now she was even more beautiful. Her lips were red and her skin was fair. Beneath the gown was a pair of long, slender legs. She wore high heels and her usual casual demeanor was gone. She exuded the charm of a little woman. For many years, she had always been so beautiful that people could not take their eyes off her. Tonight, she appeared here as the person in charge of the studio and caused quite a stir. Firstly, it seemed that the eldest Miss G hadn't attended such a formal occasion for a long time. Secondly, after marrying into the Mo family, she had been keeping a low profile and rarely showed up. Last time at the Mo Corporation and Shine's dinner party, she was carried away by Mo Jingshan. Although many of the people present hadn't seen the scene that night, they had heard of Mrs. Mo. Right now Mrs. Mo seemed to be very stable. Many people did not expect that Jinwan would actually be able to stand firmly by Mo Jingshan's side. She was not even chased out by the Mo family. Most of Haicheng's wealthy young ladies hoped that Jinwan would not be able to live well. However, things did not go as they wished. Jinwan was as beautiful as ever. In fact, compared to the arrogant and bright her of the past, she appeared more composed and reserved. Her exquisite makeup hid her beautiful and aggressive appearance, and her low-key evening dress made her appear even more indifferent. She was beautiful, but she was no longer arrogant. Instead, she appeared cold and elegant. Apart from this, the female bodyguard by her side was also particularly eye-catching. Mrs. Mo, I'll wait for you over there. If anything happens, I'll come over immediately. Feng Ling knew that it was not convenient for her to follow by Jinwan's side. After sending Jinwan over, she took her leave. Jinwan had Feng Ling head to the resting area to eat something while she walked in alone. She ignored the gazes of the people around her and maintained a dignified and polite smile. However, she did not expect to meet Sheng Yihan in such a place. From afar, she saw the tall figure dressed in a suit. Jinwan felt a lump in her throat. What are you hiding from? She walked away from the crowd and was about to go to the leaders of the National Land Office when she was interrupted by Sheng Yihan, who had approached her without her noticing. Jinwan ignored him and did not respond. In the blink of an eye, she began to chat with several celebrities who used to be friends with the Ji family, trying to ignore Sheng Yihan's figure and the gaze he was casting at her. Seeing that she was deliberately avoiding him, Sheng Yihan smiled and was not in a hurry to go over. He waited until the celebrities left after exchanging greetings with her. Then he looked at the little woman who turned around in the crowd and couldn't find other acquaintances. She couldn't help but look back at him. He looked at her snow-white neck and wrists. Unlike other socialites who wore all kinds of luxurious accessories, she was so clean that there was not even a simple thin chain or diamond watch. However, she was beautiful in her own way. Jinwan remembered that at the Shine Group's dinner party, she had sat in his car because she was drunk. At that time she was so angry that she was muddle-headed. Now, she tried to avoid him as much as possible and did not want to have any contact with him. She turned to quickly walk out of the crowd. However, because she turned too quickly, she accidentally bumped into a beautiful woman holding a glass of red wine. Chapter 157. Jinwan usually did not pay much attention to the people at such banquets. However, when she saw the beautiful lady's face, her movements faltered. Her slightly apologetic expression immediately faded. This beautiful lady had once formed a grudge with her. She was the pearl of a furniture company, and her surname seemed to be Han. This Miss Han was once one of Mo Jingshan's pursuers. It could not be said that Mo Jingshan was not someone these people could easily meet. Especially after his marriage, these socialites who once had a crush on him and even threatened to jump off a building just to meet him could not even catch a glimpse of his back. This Miss Han, who had once appeared on Hai Cheng's news for almost jumping off a building for Mo Jingshan, was unconvinced by Jin Wan's title as the #1 socialite due to her beautiful appearance. She had tried to compete with Jin Wan several times at banquets, but was always coldly ignored by Jin Wan. As time passed, they began to dislike each other and formed a grudge. What angered her even more was that after Jin Wan married Mo Jingshan, she not only lost completely, but was also angered to the point of vomiting blood. Being able to meet Jin Wan again at such an occasion, Miss Han naturally would not miss out on the opportunity to nitpick. Although Jin Wan did not have much feelings for this Miss Han, when she saw the red wine stains on her gown, she lightly mocked, "You're still holding the wine glass firmly in your hand, but the wine in the glass has spilled all over you. Do you need me to tell you how exactly you spilled it? Are you sure you want to use such a despicable method to frame me at a banquet between the political and business worlds?" Miss Han's expression was unquenchable. "What do you mean? You're still polite after knocking into me? This gown of mine was just ordered from overseas. Let's not talk about how expensive it was, but you ruined it the moment I put it on." Jin Wan was expressionless, but she did not wish to waste her energy arguing with someone like this. She calmly glanced at her and impatiently asked, "So what do you want?" Miss Han looked at Jin Wan arrogantly and then glanced at the gown Jin Wan was wearing. She recognized that this gown was made by a famous designer in Paris and immediately said, "Take off your gown. Wear it for me." Jin Wan slightly raised her brows. "Are you sure?" Originally, the commotion here was not loud, but because Miss Han had intentionally raised her voice, all sorts of unfriendly gazes were directed toward Jin Wan. There were many people who were on the same side as Miss Han. In Hai Cheng, there were many who were unconvinced by Jin Wan and could not bear to see Jin Wan marrying into the Mo family. Various wealthy young ladies saw this scene and approached to watch. Their gazes were all directed in Jin Wan's direction. They stood by the side and pointed, whispering, and their gazes were unkind. "What's going on?" Miss Lin, who had a good relationship with Miss Han, walked over and asked deliberately. Miss Han said unhappily, "A certain Hai Cheng's #1 socialite is now crowned with the Mo family's name. She walks around with her eyes on the top of her head and doesn't even look at others. She bumped into me and caused my red wine to spill all over my body. In the end, not only did she refuse to apologize, she even became arrogant in front of me. Tell me, how can there be such logic in this world? She dirtied my gown, and I have to bow and scrape to her on account of her status as Mrs. Mo?" By the side, Miss Lin and the other wealthy young ladies all shifted their gazes toward Jin Wan. Facing a common love rival, they naturally stood on the same side. To be able to see Jin Wan make a fool of herself in front of everyone was naturally a joyous thing. Miss Lin spoke with a conciliatory tone, "Since that's the case, then Mrs. Mo should apologize to Miss Han. After all, you've dirtied her gown. Although your status is high and the clothes you wear are many times better than ours, you can't look down on others like this. Is someone else's gown not a gown? If it's dirtied, you have to apologize." A smile appeared on Jin Wan's face. "Me apologize?" Miss Han and Miss Lin stood before Jin Wan, but for some reason they felt that their aura could not compare to Jin Wan's. They felt as though they were shorter in front of her. However, there were still many people watching by the side, and there were many who were unhappy with Jin Wan. Miss Han met Jin Wan's eyes and said, "Earlier on, didn't you ask me how I want to resolve this matter? I've already said take off your own clothes. I'll let this matter go like this." Jin Wan tilted her head slightly, looking at her with a smile that was not a smile. "Miss Han, you really don't care about trifles. Do you really like wearing clothes that others have worn? You don't have misophobia, but I have a very severe misophobia. I'd rather throw this gown into a shredder than allow others to touch my things." As she spoke, she paused for several seconds. "Also, Miss Han, you only have 2 mouthfuls of red wine left in your hand. You're holding the glass so firmly. I only turned around and bumped into you. It doesn't even count as bumping into you. Such a small amount of wine actually spilled onto you, and you cleverly stained it in the most obvious spot. I can't even be sure if I actually touched the hand you used to hold the wine. Do you really have to make a big deal out of it? Could it be that you've contracted Parkinson's at such a young age? Your hands trembled to the point where someone only touched you slightly, and the wine in this glass spilled onto you? You." Miss Han instantly stared at Jin Wan in disbelief. She was so angry that her face was pale. She was clearly telling others that she was framing her and intentionally stirring up trouble. Right now the one whose gown was dirted is me. Miss Han gritted her teeth in anger. Mrs. Mo, your face is really too ugly when you're trying to push the blame away. Am I pushing the blame away? If you can prove that this wine was indeed spilled by me, I'll immediately compensate you with a gown of the same style. But if you want me to take it off and give it to you, I'm afraid you're not qualified. Besides, Jean Wan's gaze calmly swept across her body. You're shorter than me by 5 centimeters, but you're clearly several kilograms heavier than me. Are you sure that even if I take it off you'll be able to wear it? Jean Wan's speech was not fast, but there was no way for others to interrupt. The one who could not interrupt the most was naturally Miss Han. She was so angry that her hands were trembling. Chapter 158. For so many years, the reason why Jean Wan was not liked by these women in the socialite circle was because of her unyielding face and her mouth. Jean Wan was never at a disadvantage. Regardless of whether it was in the past or now, even after 10 more years of life experience, under her calm and reserved appearance, her personality of not allowing others to step on her head was still there. Whoever wanted to take advantage of her would most likely have to go back to the furnace and be remolded for several years. But from the looks of it, it really seemed as though she, Mrs. Mo, was bullying some of the Han family's young ladies. After all, her title of Mrs. Mo was enough to suppress others. Furthermore, this title caused all these wealthy young ladies to grit their teeth in hatred. Miss Lin saw that Miss Han was angered to the point of speechlessness and directly took a step forward. Mrs. Mo's aura is really great. As expected, you're different after marrying Mo Jingshan. I heard that the last time you appeared in such an occasion, you pretended to be weak and was carried by Xiao Mo. We were still wondering how you managed such a marriage. So, it turns out that you're just pretending to be a little white flower in front of Xiao Mo? Now that Xiao Mo isn't here, you're starting to put on an oppressive aura again, aren't you? As expected, you're a scheming woman. Do you dare to say that you didn't purposely dirty her clothes? Do you dare to say that you're not targeting her? Jean Wan coldly glanced at her. Why would I target her? Isn't it because you know that Miss Han has always liked Xiao Mo? And because she once had a little relationship with Xiao Mo, you're jealous and hate her in your heart. Today, seeing her here, you want to dirty her clothes and embarrass her? Besides, who here doesn't know what kind of conduct you had in the past? You're an arrogant young lady who has bullied others many times. Why are you pretending to be innocent and virtuous now? Jean Wan's expression immediately darkened. Aside from being too lazy to pay attention to idlers like you, when have I ever bullied anyone? Pride doesn't seem to need you to judge. For example, this Miss Han in front of me. She asked me to take off my gown for her to wear, but I refused. She lifted a rock to smash her own feet and lost face, and now it's me who's bullying her? You're targeting me from the start. Otherwise, you wouldn't have bumped into me. Miss Han took the opportunity to speak. Jean Wan narrowed her eyes. Once, in order to pursue my husband, you even resorted to jumping off a building and acting crazily. In the end, he didn't even give you a single glance. How are you worthy of my attention? How is he worthy of me targeting him? The past was suddenly brought up again. Miss Han's expression instantly turned green. Her heart was pierced by Jean Wan's words of, my husband. You have to know your place. If you can't take back the dirty water you've spilled, kneel on the ground and lick it clean. Don't expect others to wipe it for you. Jean Wan coldly said and turned to leave. Jean Wan. Don't put on such an arrogant face. You were able to marry into the Mo family because you looked like a vixen. Let's see how many more years you can use this foxy trick. Right now, Mo Jingshan wants you. Who knows what will happen after a few years. If he gets sick of you and kicks you out of the Mo family, you, a second-hand good, can only be surrounded by a group of old men to sleep with you. You only have a face. What capital do you have to be proud of? What are you pretending for? Suddenly, Miss Han seemed to have been thoroughly angered and scolded. Jean Wan paused and turned to look at her mildly. Just a face for nothing? You don't even have a face and you dare to stand here and talk about capital with me? Miss Han's tone faltered. She did not expect herself to be dragged into this. She gritted her teeth in anger. Miss Han's father was also present. When he heard the commotion, he immediately came over. When he saw that it was Jean Wan, although Jean Wan had the Mo family as her backing, he could not help but furrow his brows when he saw that his daughter was angered to such an extent and that her skirt was dirted. He used the attitude of an elder to instigate, Mrs. Mo, it's best to be more down to earth. If you do something wrong, you should admit it. Although my daughter shouldn't have openly quarreled with you here and hurt your face, since you dirted her clothes, You should at least show the proper attitude. Can't you understand human language? Jinwan no longer had any patience. She was even more unwilling to fight a battle of attrition with these people and felt that it was a waste of time. Her skirt was dirted by herself. It has nothing to do with me. If you don't believe me, you can check the surveillance footage yourself. Stand up and speak after you're done. Miss Han's father's expression immediately turned ugly. Mrs. Mo's upbringing is really too poor. Speaking to your elders like this, is this how your father taught you? It seems like I should find some time to have a chat with Director Ji and Elder Mo. If it were not for the fact that he could not embarrass Jinwan in front of so many people, Miss Han's father really wanted to give Jinwan a slap to let her know what was good for her. Miss Han relied on the fact that everyone was backing her up and that her father was by her side. She immediately looked at Jinwan arrogantly and domineeringly. The truth is right in front of us. After all, you did touch me, and the force with which you touched me can't be seen from the surveillance footage. Right now we can turn this into a small matter. I still have that request. Take off your clothes. So what if I can't wear it? I didn't say I wanted to wear it. Take off your clothes in front of everyone, and I won't bicker with you. At this moment, a lazy and smiling voice came from behind Jinwan. Miss Han, are you sure you want Mrs. Mo to take off her clothes in front of everyone? There are at least dozens of people here, if not hundreds. With so many people here, I'm afraid it won't be enough for Mo Jingshan to dig them out. This voice belonged to Sheng Yihan. Although he was clearly speaking for Jinwan, his words still caused Jinwan to feel extremely unhappy. His words were obviously filled with sarcasm and mockery that only she could hear. Mr. Sheng, I heard that you once had some relations with the Ji family. Aren't you afraid of causing a misunderstanding by standing up for Mrs. Mo at this time? Miss Han could no longer suppress her anger. She completely did not give Sheng Yihan any face. Even though he was already the successor of the Sheng family and his status could not be underestimated, she refused to let things go just like that. Besides, Mrs. Mo can't possibly not have a spare set of clothes. It's just taking off her gown. It can't be that she doesn't even have underwear underneath. She's Hai Cheng's #1 socialite. If she doesn't reveal her figure for everyone to see, who can say that she's worthy of these words? Miss Han glared at Jinwan. Miss Han, the Sheng family's department store is nearby. If you want, you can choose a few items at any time. They'll all be under this Sheng's name. Sheng Yihan continued to smile lightly. There's no need to make things so difficult for her. Miss Han did not give up. Mr. Sheng, are you trying to be a flower protector? What if I insist that Jinwan take off her clothes today? This Sheng has said everything. The Sheng family's department store's doors are always open for Miss Han, but you clearly do not plan on giving me this face. Sheng Yihan smiled faintly. Miss Han had already lost her rationality from anger. She coldly snorted. If Mr. Sheng's face is useless, then what about mine? Chapter 159. Jinwan was also startled. Tonight, Mo Jingshan had other matters to attend to in the company and could not leave. He gave her a chance to be independent, so she did not ask to come. She did not expect him to actually appear. She clearly did not suffer any grievances, and it was just a small argument. However, in this situation and with Sheng Yihan present, she subconsciously felt her scalp tighten. Hearing Mo Jingshan's voice, Miss Han's expression changed greatly. She turned back in disbelief, and the moment she saw Mo Jingshan, she felt her legs weaken. Mo, everyone looked in that direction. The man was dressed in a black suit, revealing a white shirt. His black trousers were straight and meticulous, and his handmade Italian leather shoes were unhurried as he walked out from the crowd. The moment the tall, handsome man appeared in the hall, he carried a cold aura, causing the people around him to hold their breaths and take a step back. No one dared to stand out and say a word. The man's cold and indifferent brows under his short hair were covered with a thin layer of frost. His perfect, heart-stopping silhouette revealed a cold indifference that no one dared to approach. The moment Jinwan met Mo Jingshan's gaze, she slowly pursed her lips. These people never had a moment of peace. They insisted on making a low-key person like him unhappy on such an occasion. If they provoked Mo Jingshan, they would be the ones to suffer in the end. Even she didn't want to see the scene of these people being abused later. What's more, she felt that if her husband's cold aura was seen by these women who had ill intentions toward him, they would have all sorts of thoughts in their hearts. She really wanted to hide this man away. Miss Han looked at the approaching man. She knew better than anyone that Mo Jingshan's gaze had never landed on anyone else for even a second. From beginning to end, the person he was looking at was Jinwan. Xiao had thought about this man for so long, but she had never received the slightest bit of his favor. Not even a moment of eye contact had passed. Everyone looked at Mo Jingshan. From the moment he appeared, no one dared to speak. Not to mention the business world or the political world, many people in Haicheng had to rely on the Mo family. Therefore, even if these people did not give face to the Sheng family, they would not dare to offend Mo Jingshan in the slightest. Otherwise, they would not have a good ending. It was just that she didn't expect that Xing Yihan would protect Jinwan even though she was the target of public criticism. It was said that Xing Yihan had a deep relationship with the Ji family, and it was clear that they were enemies. But more importantly, Mo Jingshan would come. Mo Jingshan actually appeared. This was an absolutely unexpected result. If they had known that he would come, who would have dared to take the opportunity to spew dirty water on Mrs. Mo? Now, the people around them all wanted to retreat 800 meters away to avoid being implicated. Mo Jingshan walked up to Jinwan and stopped. He touched her hair, which was a rare sight. He lowered his eyes to look at the evening gown she was wearing, his voice low and heavy. Very beautiful. Jinwan, the surrounding people were completely taken aback. Although they had heard that Mo Jingshan seemed to care a lot about Jinwan, they never expected that in such an occasion and under such an atmosphere, the first thing he would do after appearing would be to praise his wife's beauty. He really did not place anyone in his eyes at all. Miss Han felt even more embarrassed by the sight. Back then, in order to speak to Mo Jingshan, she even wanted to jump off a building, but this man was so cold that he did not even look at her. He did not even send a secretary to comfort her. Even when the news of her wanting to jump off a building was published on social news and the reporters went to interview him, he still did not respond. It was as though any woman who pursued him and liked him did not exist in his eyes, and he did not need to waste a single second on them. But towards this Jinwan, although Jinwan didn't suffer any loss just now, she was still a little nervous in front of so many people. Now that Mo Jingshan was by her side, she seemed to be relaxed. Standing by his side, she didn't speak but just smiled. No matter where you go, there are people who want to bully you. Is it because you're too weak, or does everyone think that Mrs. Mo can be ridden on by anyone? Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold and his tone was cold. However, it revealed a sense of protection that belonged solely to Jinwan. The surrounding people did not dare to breathe loudly because of his words. Jinwan smiled. She was about to say that she was not bullied when the man reached out and pulled her into his embrace. He held her waist, allowing her to lean into his embrace. He then touched her shoulder and lowered his eyes to look at her. Not cold? Jinwan shook her head. There's air conditioning in the banquet hall. It's not cold. By the side, Miss Lin and Miss Han watched with reddened eyes. Earlier, this Jinwan was arrogant as though she was not afraid of anyone. However, with Mo Jingshan's arrival in the blink of an eye, she seemed to have softened into a harmless little rabbit. She was completely protected in the man's embrace. Her earlier domineering appearance was nowhere to be seen. Mo, don't be fooled by her. Earlier she was very arrogant. Did she always pretend to be so weak and pitiful when she was with you? She was clearly the one who bumped into me here. She refused to apologize and even... Miss Han's eyes were red from anger as she spoke. Mo Jingshan patted Jinwan's head and turned to look at Miss Han. He said with a smile that did not seem like a smile, "Earlier on, were you the one who asked her to take off her clothes in public?" Miss Han originally wanted to use this opportunity to smear Jinwan's name. However, the moment she met Mo Jingshan's gaze, her heart was instantly filled with fear. She resisted the fear and straightened her neck to say, "My gown was dirted by her. Initially, I only wanted to exchange gowns with her. She was the one who refused and even turned around to bite me. She even brought up the past, between you and me to mock me." Miss Han softened her voice as she spoke. She was slightly embarrassed. However, Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold as he watched her. "Me and you? What happened between us? Do we know each other?" Miss Han's complexion instantly paled. The surrounding young ladies all looked at her with pity and disdain. Not only did Miss Han's expression turn ugly, but everyone present also stared in disbelief at Mo Jingshan, who was protecting Jinwan in his embrace. Mo Jingshan's words clearly sounded calm and unemotional, but it was as though a sharp knife had silently drilled out, stabbing Miss Han until she was covered in blood. Miss Han bit her lips hard. She did not expect that back then, when she was willing to risk her life for him and jumped off a building, shocking the entire city. Mo Jingshan, as the person involved, did not even remember her name. Miss Han felt wronged. She still wanted to fight for herself. Chapter 160. Mo Jingshan's tone was very calm, but it was cold and dangerous. Jin Wan suddenly felt a bone-piercing coldness and viciousness from this man who had always treated her gently and patiently. Actually, it's not a big deal. They can't pressure me, Jin Wan whispered in his arms. However, Mo Jingshan only caressed her hair, speaking warmly, "Be good. Some people must be taught a lesson. Your temper is good, but it doesn't mean I'll tolerate it." The expression on Miss Han's face was about to shatter, and the people around her were sighing in their hearts. Jin Wan had a good temper? When had Jin Wan's temper ever been good? Was it because Jin Wan's acting skills were too good, or was it because beauty was in the eye of the beholder? Jin Wan was also speechless for a moment. She gently pinched his sleeves and softly said, "Tonight's banquet, my goal is to leave a good impression in the eyes of the City Hall's Homeland Security Department. You just have to help me regain my face. Don't let this kind of thing bother you." Mo Jingshan placed another comforting kiss on her hair. "All right, I know." His attitude couldn't be considered very gentle, but it made the eyes of all the rich young ladies, including Miss Han, almost turn red. The man who was usually so cold and indifferent actually gave all his love to Jin Wan alone. "What? Mo. I think today's matter, we should just muddle through." Miss Han's father braced himself and said, "This matter, my daughter is indeed in the wrong. Her beloved gown was dirted, so she couldn't control her emotions and offended Mrs. Mo. This is really..." Miss Han's father still wanted to speak but was stopped by Mo Jingshan's gaze. "The thing I hate the most is seeing my woman being bullied in public. Everyone here, who else wishes to see her undress?" Miss Han and Miss Lin couldn't help but shiver. Sheng Yihan didn't feel anything because of the scene just now. Seeing Jin Wan in Mo Jingshan's arms, he glanced at Mo Jingshan and smiled with interest. Seeing that Miss Han was frightened to the point of trembling, Mo Jingshan's dark eyes swept past her. "Since you're the first to find trouble, don't you want someone to test your figure in front of everyone? Then you start. You take it off first." Miss Han's expression was stiff. Her fingers gripped the hem of her dress tightly. As she faced Mo Jingshan, she felt her heart tremble. At the same time, she blushed because Mo Jingshan had forced her to take off her clothes. Seeing that Miss Han was still blushing at such a time, Jin Wan felt upset. She raised her eyes to glance at Mo Jingshan. The man lowered his head to look at the woman in his arms who appeared to be jealous. He then glanced at the time and knew that she did not have the patience to continue dealing with these people. He then turned to look at them. Those who were making a ruckus just now, who wants to see them take off their clothes? This Mo doesn't mind asking this hotel to open up a hall for you to watch. There were many people present, but the room was silent. No one dared to make a sound. Everyone could tell that Mo Jingshan's so-called opening up the hall was actually to send these troublemakers to a certain place. In any case, it would not be a good place and they would definitely not have a good ending. "You don't want to take it off?" Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at Miss Han, suddenly smiling coldly. "Then why don't we follow Mr. Sheng's earlier suggestion and dig out a pair of eyes to take a look?" Miss Han's face instantly turned pale. Her eyes were filled with fear. Mo Jingshan's gaze coldly swept across the crowd. At this moment, the bodyguards rushed in. Even Feng Ling, who previously did not move because she thought Jin Wan could handle everything, also walked in. Mo Jingshan's tone was low and slow, but it carried a bone-chilling coldness. "Take them away. Take off your clothes and throw them in front of the hotel as a public display." "No." Miss Han instantly screamed. "I don't want to take off my clothes. I don't want to." In the end, the bodyguards had already stepped forward to hold her down. Miss Han screamed and struggled madly. Don't want. Mo, you can't do this to me. My clothes were dirted by Jin Wan. I was only joking with her. I didn't really want to do anything to her." Mo Jingshan's thin lips curved up without any warmth. He glanced at her as though she was the real joke. "So, are you going to take it off yourself or do you want my people to help you?" I'll take it off. Miss Han struggled to free her hands. She cried as she raised her hands and tugged the shoulders of her gown down. Although it was only a little, she still felt extremely embarrassed. She looked at Mo Jingshan with a sullen face, begging him to let her off. Mo Jingshan's cold gaze did not even look at her. He turned to look at Miss Lin, who was stunned by the side. "Do you want my people to help you or do you want to do it yourself?" Miss Lin did not expect that she would not be able to escape. She stood awkwardly on the spot. When she saw the bodyguards approaching, she was frightened into a low cry. She hugged her shoulders and squatted on the ground, crying. She refused to take off her gown no matter what. Miss Han's father could not stand it any longer. He could only turn to Jean Wan and say softly, "Mrs. Mo, today's matter is our fault, but this matter, there are many people from the political world present. If this matter blows up, it won't be beneficial to anyone." His intention was for Jean Wan to plead for leniency. He was clear that if Jean Wan did not speak up right now, Mo Jingshan would settle the score with everyone present. Jean Wan thought about it. Although she did not have good intentions, she did not wish for Mo Jingshan to make a big fuss over her. She did not wish for her matters to implicate him. Furthermore, this was a matter between women. Jean Wan was about to raise her head from his embrace when she abruptly heard Mo Jingshan's voice above her head, using the people from the political world to warn her. "Do you think this Mo is just a decoration here?" Miss Han's father instantly felt awkward. Indeed, no one present dared to refute Mo Jingshan at this moment. Even the people from the political world had to give him some face. In such a situation, the people from the political world would only think of ways to quickly appease Mo Jingshan's anger. Who would dare to have any prejudice against Jean Wan, whom he was protecting in his embrace? Miss Han cried by the side while tugging at her clothes. Her movements were very slow. Mo Jingshan's gaze did not look in that direction. His hand caressed Jean Wan's head as he softly asked, "Have you calmed down?" Jean Wan nodded. Although it was indeed very satisfying, she still tugged on his sleeve to softly say, "Just let them apologize. In the future, I still need to work in the business world. I can't leave too much of a shadow in the hearts of so many people. Otherwise, in the future when these people see me, they will have to take a detour." The banquet hall was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. The only sound that could be heard was the rustling of Miss Han's clothes. Chapter 161. Miss Han thought that she could use this opportunity to escape. In the end, Jean Wan only glanced at her, a hint of a smile yet not a smile in the depths of her eyes. "Although I didn't plan on taking things too far, if an apology can solve the problem, what's the point of having the police?" Jean Wan's face was filled with a different kind of beauty. Her delicate brows were covered with a layer of frivolous mockery, and her voice was soft with a hint of coldness. Didn't this Jean Wan act as a little white flower in front of Mo Jingshan earlier? What was going on now? Relying on Mo Jingshan's support, she was starting to act again, wasn't she? Miss Han gritted her teeth and did not make a sound. Under her father's gaze, she had no choice but to maintain her apologetic attitude. Her face was red as she said, "It's only a glass of red wine. There's no need to call the police, right?" Miss Lin, who was squatting on the ground and refusing to take off her clothes, abruptly stood up. Her eyes were filled with anger as she said, "Xiao Mo, I'm afraid you don't know how arrogant this Jean Wan is. Even if you don't help her, she can still stand on our heads. She's only pretending to be so kind and innocent because you're here. How could she be as delicate as you are right now? How disgusting." Jean Wan raised her brows. "Even now, you're still insisting that I didn't give you any face? Didn't you hear Miss Han's apology earlier? I'm the one who was wrongly accused. Do I have to be soft when trying to prove my innocence?" Miss Lin rolled her eyes at her and turned to look at Mo Jingshan. She did not believe that he would be tricked by Jean Wan's acting. After all, there were not many people who liked to see Jean Wan being so proud of herself. The few young ladies standing at the back saw that Miss Lin had taken the lead and directly agreed. "That's true. I didn't expect Mrs. Mo to be so good at acting. Xiao Mo, the moment you arrived, she immediately dove into your embrace, looking so delicate. This change in mood is really shocking." This time, the hall once again filled with similar criticisms. The malicious intent from the few rich families' young ladies was so brazen. Many people wanted to see Jean Wan's truly despondent face, or her embarrassment when she was abandoned and ignored. Even if they were not tough enough in front of Mo Jingshan, she didn't believe that Jean Wan would be able to escape from so many people's accusations and doubts. Even if they couldn't skin her alive today, they had to make her a laughing stock. At this moment, Miss Han also took the opportunity to look at Mo Jingshan. Meeting the man's pitch-black eyes, her shrill voice trembled slightly and was even a little agitated. "Xiao Mo, regarding the matter of wrongly accusing Mrs. Mo, I've already apologized. But earlier on, her ridicule toward me was indeed too much. I've always admired you, Xiao Mo. Before you got married, I even tried to find an opportunity to meet you. At that time, my emotions were unstable, so I committed suicide by jumping off a building. To me, this matter is already a very negative past. Yet, Mrs. Mo actually dared to tear open my scars and ridicule me in front of everyone. There's nothing wrong with liking someone. Besides, it was before CEO Mo got married. Shouldn't she apologize to me? Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at her. Should I applaud you for jumping off a building to commit suicide, or should I view every woman who has fallen for me in a different light? What does your negative past and extreme way of handling things have to do with me? Miss Han's expression was stiff and pale. I'm saying that earlier Mrs. Mo revealed my scars. I've already apologized to her, so she should also. Mo Jingshan's tone was cold. Do I look like someone who would uphold justice for someone unrelated to you, or am I so free that I would seek justice for someone who wrongly accused my wife? A woman who was unrelated to him was talking about her past to gain sympathy. Or perhaps, it could be said that she was trying to gain his attention. However, in Mo Jingshan's eyes, aside from Jin Wan, everything else here had nothing to do with him. Miss Han bit her lip, her hand holding onto the clothes she had just taken off. Facing the man she had liked for a long time, she lowered her head in grievance. She choked out, but however, Mo Jingshan no longer looked at her. He turned toward the group of people who were trying to bully Jin Wan. His gaze was calm and did not change in the slightest. As my wife, it doesn't matter if you're delicate or independent. When a woman should be soft, she should be soft. When she should be firm, she should be neither servile nor overbearing. The man's tone remained mild, but it caused the sensible people in the crowd to immediately shut their mouths. The hall once again descended into a strange silence. Miss Han took a deep breath. It was as though she was unwilling and filled with hatred. Her gaze shifted back and forth between Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan. All of a sudden, someone softly spoke from the crowd. Miss Han, are you still going to take off your clothes? The silence was broken. The last bit of rationality and self-esteem that Miss Han had maintained on her face was instantly shattered. That person's words seemed to have activated some sort of mechanism. Many of the people who were originally waiting to see Jin Wan make a fool of herself now understood how they could protect themselves and prevent themselves from being implicated. People were often like this. Adding insult to injury was the greatest entertainment for these upper-class young ladies. No one cared about their moral bottom line. There had to be someone who could block this storm and protect everyone. At the same time, they had to appease the woman in Mo Jingshan's embrace. Perhaps they would be able to avoid a lot of trouble. Miss Han's eyes reddened. Her two hands gripped her clothes tightly, unwilling to continue taking them off. Seeing that Jin Wan was completely in Mo Jingshan's embrace, she was about to die from anger. She gritted her teeth and spoke toward Jin Wan. The man you snatched from another woman is now protecting you in front of everyone. Mrs. Mo, you must be very proud, right? Jin Wan calmly glanced at her. She did not understand what she meant by, the man who snatched from another woman. Mo Jingshan's calm gaze caused Miss Han to feel as though she had been shoved into an ice cave. Her entire body was cold, but she was still angered to the point of madness. Furthermore, the crowd's ridicule toward her had provoked her to the point of losing her rationality. She suppressed the fear in her heart and loudly said, Jin Wan, what's with that expression? Don't you know that Mo Jingshan was once engaged in America? He once had a fiancée. Miss Han had yet to finish her words when Feng Ling, who was standing in the middle of the bodyguards, abruptly kicked the back of her knee. She abruptly staggered and knelt onto the ground. Why are you speaking so much nonsense when it's just taking off my clothes? Do you want me to help you? Feng Ling coldly spoke. Chapter 162. Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold. Seeing Miss Han's frightened and unwilling gaze, he brought Jin Wan, who had not spoken for a long time, into his embrace. Jin Wan was silent for a moment before calmly saying, Miss Han, you don't need to provoke me with such irrelevant words. Regardless of whether it's an ex-girlfriend or a so-called fiancé, in the face of our country's marriage laws, they are all equivalent to nothing. Do you know what a legal marriage is? Do you know what a wife is? Do I even need to tell you who this man belongs to? Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to look at her face. He watched as her red lips moved to and fro as she spat out these words. His eyes were filled with warmth, and there was even a faint smile on his face that could be seen by the others. Miss Han glared at her, unwilling to give up. Other people's engagement can be cancelled. So what if you're married? Aren't you still able to divorce? After Jin Wan was reborn, she was especially sensitive to the word, divorce. She turned back and narrowed her eyes, coldly saying word by word, I've already seen your sincerity in kneeling down to apologize. If you want to protect yourself, don't speak so much nonsense. No matter how much you say, isn't the result the same? You can't leave a single piece of clothing behind. From the start, Jinwan had never intended to let her take off her clothes. Since she wanted to make things so bad, then she was the one who asked for it. Feng Ling received Jinwan's words and stepped forward to kick Miss Han, who was trying to stand up. Miss Han knelt on the ground in pain. She wanted to say something but was abruptly cut off by the man's cold voice. Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold. His low and deep voice was cold and indifferent. "I'll give you one more minute." Miss Han's entire body trembled. She glanced at her father pleadingly. Miss Han's father wanted to speak but was blocked by several bodyguards dressed in black. He could not step forward. Miss Han dilly-dallied like this for more than a minute. She only managed to undo the zipper on her gown. Her hands were still tightly wrapped around her body. Mo Jingshan did not plan on wasting any more time here. His gaze landed on Feng Ling. Feng Ling immediately nodded in understanding. Rip! With a loud sound, Miss Han's clothes were instantly torn apart. As Miss Han screamed, Jinwan furrowed her brows but did not speak. Mo Jingshan had already led her away from the crowd. He did not even glance in that direction. When Mo Jingshan brought her out of the crowd, Jinwan's mind was no longer on the screams behind her. Mo Jingshan held her hand and left. He did not say another word, but her hand was held tightly by him. It had never been so tight before. It hurt a little. She raised her eyes to look at him, softly saying, "Jingshan?" Mo Jingshan paused, loosening his grip on her hand. However, he still held onto her hand, saying, "Let's go home." Jinwan nodded. Oh. When he thought of checking to see if Miss Han had really been stripped clean, it was too late to turn back. She had already been taken out of the hotel where the banquet was held. Sheng Yihan was in the crowd, his eyes focused on the back of the woman who had disappeared in front of the door. His expression was calm, but there was a hint of a seductive smile at the corner of his mouth. By the time they returned to the Yu Garden, it was already very late. Auntie Chen had already fallen asleep. Mo Jingshan opened the bedroom windows. The cool night breeze blew in. The man's short black hair was blown into a rare mess, but it did not lose his elegance. Jinwan came out of the shower. Although he did not turn back to look at her, he still closed the windows the moment she stepped out of the bathroom to prevent her from catching a cold. "I didn't eat much tonight. You didn't eat either, did you?" Jinwan asked. The man's warm and deep gaze turned over. He calmly watched her for several seconds, his gaze carrying a penetrating scrutiny. After a moment, under her clear eyes, he calmly spat out a few words, "Don't you have anything to ask me?" Jinwan really did have something to ask, but when the words reached her lips, she hesitated. The so-called past that Shuyan once mentioned was most likely related to Mo Jingshan's engagement. Although she was not too clear about his past in America, she was certain that since Mo Jingshan did not deny this matter tonight, it meant that it was true. Since he had given her the opportunity to ask, she was certainly not willing to keep a knot in her heart. Jinwan walked over and stood before him asking, "Before me, did you love any other woman?" Mo Jingshan rested one hand on the railing by the window, leaning against the blue reflection of the swimming pool in the Yu Garden. He watched her, raised his hand and rubbed it against her damp hair that she had just showered. "No," he answered. Jinwan did not ask another word and directly smiled. "Then I have nothing to ask." Seeing the woman's attitude, Mo Jingshan chuckled softly. He raised his hand to unbutton the top 3 buttons of his shirt. "Hungry? What do you want to eat?" "Go take a shower first. Auntie Chen is already asleep. I'll go cook 2 bowls of noodles. Although it's not as good as yours, at least it's edible." Jinwan spoke and turned to bring out his clothes, urging him to take a shower. Mo Jingshan looked at her frank and clean gaze. After a moment he took the clothes. "All right." Jinwan was in the kitchen watching the boiling water in the pot. It was not until the water had boiled for a long time that she remembered to put the noodles in. After hearing the sound, Auntie Chen got up and put on a coat to help her cook. Jinwan declined and asked Auntie Chen to go back to her room to rest. After cooking the noodles, she picked up a tray, put the 2 bowls of noodles on it and carried them up. She had just returned to the room to put down the tray in her hands when she turned back to see the bathroom door open. The man casually wrapped a white bath towel around his waist. His skin was healthy and slightly whiter than the standard healthy man's, but he did not look feminine at all. His body was so standard that it could be described as perfect. His muscles were well defined and there were still water droplets rolling down his chest, hidden in the bath towel. Although they had lived together for so long, every time Jinwan saw this scene, she still wanted to push him back into the bathroom and let him put on his clothes before coming out. "Then try it. Ever since I ate the noodles you made that time, I haven't cooked noodles for a long time. Jinwan sat by the table as she spoke. She picked up her chopsticks and tasted a mouthful. Thankfully, when she was in the kitchen earlier, aside from being slightly distracted when boiling the water, she paid attention to the hardness of the noodles and did not cook them too badly. Although the taste was not as good as Mo Jingshin's, it was not bad either. Mo Jingshin glanced at her and was about to walk over when the little woman's mouth was full of noodles. She looked at him with her cheeks puffed up, saying vaguely, "Put on your clothes first." Mo Jingshin watched her eating manner and smiled. The windows were open earlier, so the room was slightly cold. He glanced at her again and turned to put on a bathrobe. Chapter 163. Let me try. Mo Jingshin walked over. Jinwan pushed the other bowl toward him, indicating for him to have a taste. However, the man pressed her outstretched hand down, lowering his head to kiss her lips that were still stained with broth. Jinwan, after sweeping away the taste of the broth in her mouth, he finally released her, mildly commenting, "It's not bad. The broth is delicious and very flavorful." Jinwan, this man was simply too much. He even wanted to take advantage of her while eating noodles. At night, Jinwan lifted the blanket to get off the bed. The moment she lifted the blanket, it was covered again. Jinwan frantically said, "I'm tired to death." She did not put any medicine in the noodles, yet she was bullied by Mo Jingshin for an entire night. Even now, her face was still red from the intense entanglement. She blushed and wanted to get up to drink some water. In the end, Mo Jingshin easily pulled her back. Jinwan's entire body was sore and weak. She curled up under his body and did not move. "Are you really tired?" He kissed the corner of her lips. "I still have things to do in the studio tomorrow. You have to at least let me get out of bed," Jinwan said with resentment and anger. The man rubbed her head and carried her to take a shower. When he returned, he tucked her under the blanket and went to the study. Jinwan did not ask why he went to the study so late at night. She was really too tired. She flipped over, hugged the blanket, and fell asleep. When it was almost dawn, she suddenly woke up with a start. She reached to the side and felt the coldness of the bed. Mo Jingshin still had not returned to bed. She turned to look in the direction of the study. The light in the study was still on. 2 days later, it was said to be Nanhang's birthday. Coincidentally, Nanhang had just returned from America. Mo Jingshin had called to inform Jinwan that he would bring her to Zijing Cheng Club that night. Because the studio needed to receive many representatives from large real estate companies, Jinwan was busy until late. She knew the location of Zijing Cheng Club and did not ask Mo Jingshin to pick her up. Instead, she had Feng Ling accompany her. After she was done with her work, they would head over together. Amethyst Town Clubhouse was the largest gathering place for the upper class in High City. Only people with platinum and diamond cards could enter. Because of this, even though the nightlife and entertainment programs were plentiful, there were very few illegal people who could sneak in. Every high-class private room was guarded by a waiter and security guards. Why didn't Jinwan come along? Qin Sighting sat on the sofa in the private room and glanced at Mo Jingshin, who was sitting alone, with a funny expression. Nanheng also turned his eyes, a hint of mockery on his handsome face. "I was just about to ask, you're just short of hanging Jinwan on your waist and bringing her with you every day. You actually didn't let anyone follow you today?" Mo Jingshin calmly replied, "She's busy." Qin Sighting mocked, "Your woman is busier than you? Is there a problem?" Mo Jingshin coldly glanced at him. A frivolous smile appeared on Qin Sighting's face. He stretched out his long legs and casually leaned back on the sofa. He sneered. "So it's your woman who isn't willing to be a good wife at home and wants to grow wings and fly out? Why didn't you stop her? Aren't you afraid that if she really achieves something, there will be more and more men behind her in the future? Good wife." Nanheng was confused. When did she become associated with these 3 words? Speaking of this, Qin Sighting glanced at Nanheng with some smugness. "You're the one who didn't have the fortune to taste it. Not long ago, Jinwan personally went to my house to make the fruit and vegetable salad and the 3 kinds of cold vegetables. The taste was really not bad. If it wasn't for the fact that there was a person who always shielded her, I would have been able to taste even more of her cooking. That big miss now knows how to cook. It doesn't seem too strange to use these 3 words on her." Nanheng chuckled lightly, lazily asking, "Are you serious?" Mo Jingshin glanced at the time. When he spoke again, his tone was cold and sharp. He played down his words. "What nonsense are you talking about? Did you arrange to meet here just to hear the 2 of you care about my woman?" "Nanheng," Qin Siding smiled mysteriously. You'll get used to it. Nan Heng's smoking addiction was great. Not long after, the private room was filled with smoke. Mo Jingshan had also drunk quite a bit earlier, but he was not drunk. He glanced at the time, stood up, and went to the restroom. Several minutes later, several young ladies in Xi Jingqing Club were attracted by the man who had just walked out of the restroom. The drunken ladies egged each other on as they followed him. They secretly made bets to see who would be able to sleep with such a rare quality tonight. Mo Jingshan sensed that there were people following him. Seeing that they were several drunk ladies, he did not pay them any attention. When he entered the private room, he saw that quite a bit of wine had been brought in on the coffee table. There were red, blue, yellow, and all sorts of colors. He closed the door and was about to walk over when all of a sudden, the door behind him was slammed open. The sound of the door was too loud. Mo Jingshan's clear gaze turned back. Even Nan Heng and Qin Siding in the private room raised their brows, looking at the drunken ladies by the door. Seeing this situation, Qin Siding instantly understood. He chuckled softly and whistled. Yo, you're being pestered again. If Jinwan were to see this, I wonder if she would be jealous. Mo Jingshan pretended not to hear Qin Siding's words. His gaze coldly swept over the few young ladies whose faces clearly showed that they wanted to sleep with him. Get out. His voice did not contain any warmth. The few young ladies all reeked of alcohol. Originally they were quite bold, but the moment they saw the coldness in his eyes as well as the man's cold, icy aura, they all cowered. Only one of the young ladies was pushed out. It was unknown whether it was because her face was too red or because she had drunk too much, but she stared at him with a red face. Her mouth stuttered as she squeezed out a complete sentence. I think you're very handsome. I like you, so, can you? No. His cold and indifferent voice was as cold as frost. It was cold, straightforward, and decisive. The few young ladies immediately stared at him with defeated expressions. They had thought that they would be able to have an extremely romantic encounter, but who would have thought that it was actually an iceberg? By the side, the security guards had already heard the commotion and were about to chase them away. The few young ladies originally wanted to say something more, but they were directly slammed out by the door in front of them with a pung. Outside the door, there was a moment of silence. Then there was the sound of the security guards chasing them away. However, there was a sudden burst of laughter from inside the door. As expected of COMO. Your luck with women is not as good as before. Nan Heng held a cigarette in his mouth, smiling with narrowed eyes. Too much nonsense. Mo Jingshan did not look at them. He picked up his phone and called Jinwan. Chapter 164. The domestic property industry would have more and more room to grow. She and BGY's CEO sat in the conference room, sharing their opinions on the domestic property industry. Every word Jinwan said hit the nail on the head, causing BGY's CEO to anticipate the next collaboration with Mo Studio even more. Just as they were chatting excitedly, the phone on the conference table began to vibrate. Jinwan did not look at the caller ID and casually hung up the call. She then continued to speak with a smile. In Xi Jingqing Club, Mo Jingshan heard the sound of the call being hung up and glanced at the phone screen. Nan Heng glanced at the man who had yet to step out of the private room with his phone in his hand. He asked with a teasing expression, "What's with that expression? Did Jinwan hang up on you?" Mo Jingshan did not speak. This little woman had really learned to hang up on him? Earlier on, when Qin Siding said that he had actually allowed Jinwan to grow a pair of wings and fly away, he finally began to consider this matter. The 20-year-old Jinwan still had too much room to learn and grow. Thinking of the day when she truly grew up and was reborn, transforming into the so-called COG that he would no longer be able to control, Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes slightly. Qin Siding sat calmly on the other side of the sofa, drinking his wine. He gently swirled the white wine in his glass, smiling. Jinwan is truly the first person who dares to hang up on you. When she comes, I'll have to praise her properly. She's really good. Qin Siding paused for a moment before speaking again. It's already late. Don't let anything happen. Should we go take a look at her? Nan Heng glanced at the time. With Feng Ling by her side, there won't be any problems. This call was definitely hung up on her. I placed my most capable assistant by his woman's side. If something still happens, wouldn't I be letting down the many years of nurturing Feng Ling down? Mo Jingshan walked over. Before returning to the sofa, he kicked away Nan Heng's leg that was placed on the crystal coffee table. After sitting down, he said indifferently, If I don't get Feng Ling away from your side, I'm afraid you'll die in her hands. Nan Heng suddenly choked on a mouthful of smoke. He coughed until his eyes became bloodshot before he said with difficulty, "What the F***ck do you mean I'll die in her hands?" Mo Jingshan coldly sneered. "It seems like you've been very free recently." "What? I'm very free. Do you want to fight me?" Nan Heng narrowed his eyes with a cigarette in his mouth. "Don't you too? If you want to kill each other, stay away from me. I don't want to drag two seriously injured patients back to the hospital in the middle of the night. It's rare that I'm not on the night shift today." Half an hour later, Jinwan finally appeared at Xi Jingqing Club. The security guard led the way to the designated private room. Pushing the door open, he saw that the private room inside was very spacious. There were sofas, coffee tables, vertical microphones, and many other facilities that only high-class clubs would have. There were only 3 people sitting inside: Mo Jingshan, Nan Heng, and Qin Siding. Right now, Qin Siding could be considered an old acquaintance. To Jinwan, Nan Heng was someone she had only heard of but never met. It was said that he usually stayed in America for a longer period of time and was involved in the arms business. He had once made a name for himself in Haicheng and later on became famous in America. The moment she opened the door, Mo Jingshan's heavy eyes turned toward her. He said, "Nuan, come over and sit." Jinwan nodded and was about to go over when she abruptly saw Nan Heng's unbearable expression. It was as though he had goosebumps. "I say, you guys, you can kiss me however you want at home. Can't you take note that this is a public place?" Nan Heng coldly reprimanded. After knowing Mo Jingshan for so many years, they had never seen him take such initiative toward anyone, much less in such an intimate and passionate manner. It really broke through the limits of what they could accept. Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at him. "Move your feet away." Nan Heng. He really wanted to curse, but he endured it. He turned to see that Jinwan had already walked over. Nan Heng's feet were placed on the coffee table, blocking the way. As he retracted his feet, he glanced toward the door. After sending Jinwan to the door, Feng Ling dutifully stood outside the door. She turned to stand with the bodyguards by the door. "What are you standing outside for? Come in." Nan Heng suppressed his voice. It was cold and commanding. Earlier, Jinwan had also planned to let Feng Ling in, but Feng Ling did not enter. She had just sat down by Mo Jingshan's side when she raised her eyes to speak to Feng Ling outside the door. "That's right. Come in. It's not like you're an outsider." Feng Ling remained standing outside the door. She did not speak. Her gaze swept past Nan Heng's face, but it was only a calm and indifferent glance. She did not greet her former boss and shifted her gaze back to Jinwan. "This kind of occasion is not suitable for me. Mrs. Mo, I'll stand guard outside the door. Call me if there's anything." After speaking, she directly closed the door from the outside. There was a strange silence in the private room. Jinwan was used to Feng Ling's cold and stubborn temper. Seeing that the door had already been closed from the outside, she did not force it further. Mo Jingshan watched Jinwan's face and handed the wine list on the coffee table to her. "What do you want to drink?" Jinwan lowered her head to look at the wine list and then at the many good wines on the coffee table. She smiled to say, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. There's so much wine. I'll just drink with you." Chapter 165. She hung up on Mo Jingshan's call? Jinwan picked up her phone and saw that there was indeed a missed call from him. She whispered to the man sitting by her side, "Earlier on, I was talking to someone from BGY Group and didn't notice that it was you who called me. I directly hung up and rushed over afterward. I didn't look at my phone at all." Mo Jingshan glanced at her, asking softly, "Did you succeed?" Jinwan nodded at him happily. She raised her hand and gestured 2 with one hand and 8 with the other. She winked at him. "After selling this amount and tossing aside the cost, the money we earn should be enough to temporarily hand in a satisfactory answer to your father, right?" Mo Jingshan's gaze was deep as he pressed her hand down. "Even if you can't hand in this answer, he can't touch you. There's no need to work so hard." Hearing this, Qin Siding smiled. "What? Hasn't Director Mo already returned to America? He still hasn't let Jinwan off?" Mo Jingshan did not look at Qin Siding. Instead, he lowered his head to look at Jinwan. "Have you eaten tonight?" "No, I was just about to say." Jinwan glanced at the various types of alcohol on the coffee table. "Isn't today Nan Heng's birthday? I've been here for so long. Why haven't I seen any cake?" She had thought that she would be able to eat a few bites of cake. Furthermore, she had rushed over after finishing her work and did not even have a bite of rice. Qin Siding raised his brows, casually saying, "I just finished an operation at the hospital and drove over. Where would I have the time to buy a cake?" Jin Wan faltered for a moment before turning to look at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan mildly glanced at her. "Do I look like someone who would specially buy a cake to celebrate a man's birthday?" Jin Wan pursed her lips. "Then what should we do? Even if you don't like to eat cake since it's your birthday, there has to be some form. If I had known earlier, I would have given you a call earlier. Earlier on, I happened to pass by a pretty good cake shop." "Which shop?" "Get your female bodyguard to buy it," Qin Siding said. When Nan Hung heard the words female bodyguard, he coldly glanced at him. "There's no need. Someone will come later. She will probably buy it." "Oh, aren't there just a few of us today?" Qin Siding glanced at him. Nan Hung smiled and casually leaned back on the sofa. He glanced at Qin Siding without saying a word. His gaze seemed to be saying, "Brat, just wait to be tortured." Qin Siding's handsome brows moved. After a moment of silence, he seemed to have thought of something and his face suddenly turned cold. "You can't be." Suddenly, the door to the private room was pushed open, and a figure carrying an exquisite cake box appeared in front of the door. Jin Wan looked straight ahead. It was a woman. Her figure was slim and slender, her skin was fair, and her eyes were calm and gentle. She should be about the same age as Jin Wan. Her long, slightly curly hair was spread out behind her back. She had an outstanding temperament but did not have much lethality. She was carrying a large cake box in her hand. "Sorry I'm late." The young woman came in with a natural and appropriate smile. She glanced at the faces of the people on the sofa and paused a little longer on Qin Siding's cold face, but only for a fraction of a second. Then she looked at Nan Hang and Mo Jingshan with a smile. At the same time she smiled at Jin Wan. "Hello, you're Jin Wan, right? We've met before but you definitely don't remember. I'm sure Nianj." "Monsieur?" Hearing this, Jin Wan finally had an impression. Shi Nianj, the daughter of Hai Cheng's Shida International Group. She was 2 years older than Jin Wan. The Shi family lived in America and their domestic company was in Haicheng. Jin Wan had indeed met her before, but it was only when Jin Wan and Ji Hongwen attended a banquet several years ago. There was even a rumor that Shi Nianj was the only one who could compare to Jin Wan in terms of beauty. If it weren't for the fact that the Shi family was not in Haicheng, the two of them would definitely be the two most famous flowers in Haicheng. The two did not have much contact. When Shi Nianj was in Haicheng, Jin Wan was studying abroad. When Jin Wan returned, Shi Nianj had already returned to America. Otherwise they might have become very good friends. Jin Wan stood up, took the cake for her and placed it on the coffee table. She said sincerely, "It's really been many years since we last met. Monsieur, why have you returned? Will you settle in Haicheng or return to America?" "The Shi family's domestic headquarters will remain in Haicheng. Perhaps I will stay but there may also be other changes." As Shi Nianj spoke, she glanced at Nan Hang. "I brought the cake so late. I didn't spoil your mood, did I?" "No, you came just in time. Mrs. Mo was just complaining about why there was no cake," Nan Hang said, his gaze meaningfully glancing at Qin Siding, who had not spoken a single word. Jin Wan felt that the atmosphere was different from what she had expected. She glanced at Nan Hang and then at Qin Siding. She felt that Qin Siding seemed to be surrounded by a cold aura, suppressing a gloomy coldness that she had never seen before. She turned to look at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan did not even raise his eyes. He continued drinking the wine in his glass, clearly unconcerned. "I ordered the cake yesterday. Earlier on, when I was about to collect it, I found out that their dessert chef had applied for a leave and would only be back in the afternoon. He only started making it in the afternoon, so I waited for a long time." As Shi Nianj spoke, she opened the cake box with a smile. She said to Jin Wan, "When did Miss Ji get married? I didn't even get a cup of wedding wine to drink." As she spoke, she glanced at Mo Jingshan. "CO Mo didn't even send a wedding invitation to our Shi family. Isn't that too ungrateful? Sit down and talk." Mo Jingshan indicated for them to sit down. Jin Wan and Shi Nianj opened the cake together and took out the candles. She then pulled Shi Nianj to sit by the side. All of a sudden, Qin Siding stood up, picked up his coat from the sofa and said coldly and casually, "I still have something to do. I'll leave first." Shi Nianj paused, standing by the sofa without moving. However, Jin Wan turned to look at the man with a cold expression. She also felt that the atmosphere was not right. Her gaze moved from Qin Siding's back to Shinian's slightly stiff and pale face. What was going on? Qin Siding left very decisively. He did not even look back. When he closed the door from outside, he used a lot of force. The door was basically slammed shut by him. The waiter, who was carrying hot fruit juice and a fruit platter in, was startled by the sound of the door opening and almost dropped it. Outside the door, Feng Ling saw Qin Siding walk out with a heavy expression and stood silently by the side. Jinwan turned to look at Nan Heng and Mo Jingshan. What happened? Dr. Qin left just like that? You didn't stop him? Chapter 166. Based on a woman's intuition, Jinwan felt that there was a story between Shinian and Qin Siding. At this moment, Mo Jingshan opened his mouth, coldly and indifferently. What are you thinking? You brought her here? I've interacted with Miss Sher in America before. After all, we're old acquaintances. It's my birthday and she wants to send me a cake. Although I understand that she didn't come here to celebrate my birthday, I can't possibly reject her. Nan Heng puffed out a smoke ring, coldly smiling. She's the one who refused to give up. She knows old Qin's temper better than us. She should know the consequences of coming here today. Nan Heng then glanced at Shinian, who had been standing there silently. Back then, the one who provoked him was you. The one who left as he pleased was also you. Now that you're back, even though you know his attitude, you still insisted on coming. Now do you see it? He won't even look at you again. Shinian did not speak. When Jinwan reached out to hold her hand out of concern, she only curved her lips slightly. Her gaze was hidden in the shadows of the private room, and her emotions could not be discerned. At this moment, outside the private room, a commotion came from afar. It sounded like a woman's sharp cries and screams, as well as the sound of many people's footsteps. Qin Siding had not walked far out of the private room. He did not stop because of the gathering crowd and the cries. However, as he walked past the crowd, he abruptly heard the sound of a woman being slapped. Accompanied by several men's roguish curses, he expressionlessly turned to look at the crowd. He abruptly saw the woman lying on the ground in a sorry state. His cold eyes slowly narrowed. He pushed aside the people in front of him and turned to walk over. The commotion outside was not small. Many people in the private room came out to see the situation. Shinian opened the door to the private room and saw Qin Siding from afar. Jinwan saw the crowd there and subconsciously walked out with Shinian. No matter how strict the management of Zijingcheng Club was, it was still a nightclub. It was not safe for two women to go out. Mo Jingshan stood up and went over. Nan Heng could only extinguish his cigarette, furrowing his brows as he went out to check on the situation. In the crowd, a young woman was lying on the ground. She had just been slapped twice and her clothes were a little messy. Her shoulders were half exposed, as if she had almost been molested. Her hair was also unusually messy, almost covering half of her face. However, one could still see that her face was pale with fright, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Shinian had just walked into the crowd when she saw the woman on the ground. Her calm expression changed slightly. She subconsciously raised her eyes to look at the cold Qin Siding. Jinwan paused in her steps. When Mo Jingshan came over, she turned back to whisper to him, "What happened tonight? I don't seem to understand it." Mo Jingshan had already seen the situation in the crowd. He held her hand and did not let her go to the front. He said mildly, "Qin Siding has his own business. You don't have to care." Jinwan, which woman doesn't have a burning desire for gossip? Jinwan could only turn her head to look. Nan Heng stood at the side, arms crossed over his chest, and said coldly in a low voice, "What an unexpected coincidence today. Qin Siding's two old loves are both here." Old love? Or two? Jinwan looked in surprise at Shinian in front of her, and then at the young woman on the ground who was surrounded by the crowd. Then Jinwan's gossipy eyes turned to Nan Heng. Nan Heng coldly sneered. The only person this old Qin has ever loved is Shinian. But right now it's not clear whether he loves her or not, but he definitely hates her. Nan Heng coldly glanced at the woman on the ground in the crowd. This is Ling Xiener. About 4 or 5 years ago, she had an engagement with Qin Siding. The engagement was arranged by the Qin family, but Qin Siding rejected it and it was cancelled a long time ago. This Ling Xiener is very infatuated with Qin Siding. She is young and very good at causing trouble. After being rejected, she cried, threw a tantrum and threatened to hang herself. Qin Siding did not even spare her a glance. From then on, the Ling family's relationship with the Qin family gradually worsened, and they no longer had any contact. As Nanheng spoke, Shinianj stood by the side and could more or less hear him. However, she did not move, only looking in Qin Sighting's direction. Nanheng appeared to be watching the show. Miss Ji, no matter how oblivious you are to the outside world, you should know that at the beginning of this year, Haicheng's largest electronics company, the Ling Group, announced bankruptcy. Several of the board members of the Ling Group made a wrong decision, causing the company to collapse. Not only did it go bankrupt, but it also owes a huge debt. No one knows how this Ling Shanner was sold here, but from the looks of it, the people by the side should be her buyers. She should have just escaped. Jin Wan's hand suddenly grew cold. She had experienced this before, so she understood the horror and helplessness of it all too well. This was the reality of the world. How many people were watching a big company from behind? Once it was down, there was no need to ask for help. As long as it didn't make things worse, it was already very good. Sensing Jin Wan's sudden silence, Mo Jingshan held her hand in his palm. It has nothing to do with you. Don't let your imagination run wild. Ling Shanner was forced to retreat step by those men. She laid on the ground and carefully shifted her body to the side. Her eyes were filled with fear and despair. Jin Wan felt as though she was looking at herself from her previous life. Mo Jingshan's gaze remained on her face. Seeing that her face was gradually turning pale, he asked softly, "Are you not feeling well?" Jin Wan composed herself. "Perhaps there are too many people here and I'm a little lacking in oxygen. I'm fine." "Stop looking. Let's go back." Mo Jingshan directly grabbed her hand, wanting to bring her away. At this moment, Ling Shanner, who was on the ground, suddenly cried out in pain. A man dragged her back several meters and stepped on her calf. Jin Wan turned back to see the drunken and malevolent man standing there scolding. "Smelly whore, why are you pretending to be a chaste woman after taking this old man's money? 80,000 yuan to buy your first night is already giving your Ling family some face. Otherwise people might not even be willing to pay 8,000 for a night. Since you've already been sold and your clothes have already been changed, why are you still pretending?" Ling Shanner lay on the ground crying, shaking her head non-stop. "I'm not selling. I'm not the one receiving the money. Please let me go. I beg you." The last sound was because the man had harshly stepped on her calf. Chapter 167. I'm begging you to let me go. Beg? If begging was useful, your family wouldn't have gone bankrupt. The man laughed coldly as he grabbed her hair harshly. We've waited in the room for so long and King ran off just like that? Dampening our mood isn't as simple as returning 80,000 yuan. You want your freedom, right? Then ask the people around you. Those who are able to come to Zijingcheng don't lack money. Who do you think will buy you? My price isn't high either. 10 times. How about it? 800,000 yuan. Ling Shanner cried out in despair. Her sharp cries only attracted the attention of the surrounding people. No one stepped forward. Jin Wan trembled when she heard the cries. The scenes from her past life that she had tried so hard to forget kept drilling into her mind, making it hard for her to breathe. She suppressed her heartbeat that was about to jump to her throat. She could not help but turn back and push the crowd aside. She was about to shout that she would buy it. Wasn't it just 800,000 yuan? She would buy it. I'll buy it. Suddenly someone spoke up. However, this voice did not come from Jin Wan. It was Qin Sighting. The moment she heard this name, Ling Shanner raised her disheveled face in disbelief. When she saw that it was Qin Sighting in the crowd, she immediately burst into tears. Her tears were filled with sorrow and despair, as though she had finally found a glimmer of hope. That kind of complicated sorrow was indescribable. The moment Qin Sighting spoke, Shinian's gaze shifted in his direction. It was as though something was gradually shattering in her eyes. However, Qin Sighting did not even glance at her. He only coldly said, "I've bought it. Why aren't you letting her go?" Those who were able to appear in Zijingcheng's clubhouse were all people of high status. The Qin family was one of Haicheng's 4 largest families. They were naturally prominent. The man who grabbed Ling Shanner recognized Qin Sighting. The curses he was about to spit out were immediately swallowed back. He asked with some suspicion, "Young Master Qin? Are you sure you want to buy her?" "I won't repeat myself." Qin Sighting's eyes were cold. The man could only let go. The moment Ling Shanner regained her freedom, she stumbled towards Qin Sighting and then stumbled in front of him. Qin Sighting expressionlessly avoided her outstretched hand and did not let her touch him. He maintained a distance, but he threw the jacket and the crook of his arm to Ling Shanner, who almost had half her body exposed. Ling Xian'er's entire body trembled, and she didn't dare to touch him again. She hurriedly wrapped his jacket around her body, then carefully shrunk her head and hid behind him, instinctively seeking his protection. The surrounding spectators had already begun to whisper among themselves. They were discussing how Ling Xian'er seemed to have been engaged to this young master of the Qin family in the past. Although the two of them didn't succeed, they didn't think that after so many years, young Master Qin would still be so loyal. Shi Nianj had been watching Qin's sighting the entire time. When Ling Xian'er ran behind him, her eyes were still fixed in his direction. However, Qin's sighting did not look at her at all. The crowd gradually dispersed and this farce finally came to an end. Jinwan turned to realize that Shi Nianj had already left without her noticing. When did Miss Shi leave? The scene earlier was enough to shred her heart into 1,000 pieces. She still hasn't left. Could it be that she wants to stand here and wait for us to say a few hypocritical words of comfort to her? Nan Heng stood by the side, holding a bronze-colored lighter in his hand as he absent-mindedly played with it. As he spoke, he glanced at Jinwan. Your complexion is indeed not good. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that the person who was pressed to the ground and bullied was not that Miss Ling, but you. Mo Jingshan's gaze remained on Jinwan's brows. Are you still not feeling well? He did see that Jinwan's complexion was different from usual. The emotions that flashed across her eyes did not escape his eyes. Jinwan shook her head, indicating that she was fine. She then turned to glare at Nan Heng, whose words had almost hit her weak spot. Earlier, I just couldn't bear to watch any longer. The people in this club are all wealthy and respectable. Just eating a seafood meal flown in from overseas can cost several 100,000 yuan. Earlier, when a life could have been saved, no one helped out. Nan Heng spread his hands. The business world is a place that eats people's blood. These are all nobles who have made their way through society. Everyone knows who they can't touch. She's just a young lady from a bankrupt company. The Ling family is gradually declining due to revenge, so there are many potential enemies. Who would offend someone for such a useless young lady? Jinwan's red lips curved. Her smile was mild. You guys really know how to find a suitable excuse for your cold-blooded and heartless actions. Nan Heng raised his brows, chuckling. When did Miss Ji become someone who hates evil so much? Jinwan did not say more, but it was clear that she was not in a good mood. Nan Heng sneered and walked back. What a mess. I haven't even celebrated my King birthday, and I'm already here to watch this kind of melodramatic drama at 8 o'clock. Let old Qin deal with it himself. Didn't they say that women would be in a good mood after eating cake? Miss Ji, let's go back to the private room to eat the cake. Jinwan, what a big heart. Mo Jingshan did not look at Nan Heng. He lowered his eyes to look at Jinwan. Do you want to go home or eat cake? Let's eat the cake. Even though Miss Shi has left, she still bought this cake specially for us. It'll be a waste if we don't eat it. In order to eat a few pieces of cake, Jinwan dragged Mo Jingshan back to the private room. She originally wanted Nan Heng, who was celebrating his birthday today, to cut the cake. However, Nan Heng threw the knife and fork in front of her. If you want to eat it, cut it yourself. I'm not interested in sweet things like this. Seeing that Mo Jingshan had no intention of eating it, Jinwan cut a few pieces herself and tasted the cream that she accidentally spilled on her fingers. Very sweet. It was cherry-flavored and there was even a hint of cherry wine in the cream. Nan Heng and Mo Jingshan chatted about their business dealings. In the meantime, a waiter would occasionally come in to deliver wine and fruit juice for Jinwan. Jinwan did not eat tonight, so she finished half of the 10-inch double-layered cake by herself. She also drank 3 to 4 glasses of fruit juice. Even when it ended, Shi Nianj did not return. Qin's sightings' whereabouts were also unknown. They were about to leave the private room and Jinwan followed them. However, when she stood up, she leaned against Mo Jingshan's body. Her steps were light, and her cheeks were slightly red. Her gaze was hazy as she lazily leaned against his shoulder. Mo Jingshan saw that she was clearly slightly drunk and directly held her to prevent her from falling. His cold brows furrowed. He clearly did not expect that she could get drunk like this. Is she drunk? Nan Heng was about to leave when he turned back to take a look. Chapter 168. Nan Heng snorted. In a place like Zijing City there has never been any pure fruit juice. The so-called fruit juice also contains very low alcohol content, around 6 to 10 degrees. It's basically impossible to taste. But if you can get drunk like this, how bad is your alcohol tolerance, Miss G? Jinwan opened her eyes in a daze to look at Mo Jingshan. Is that so? Mo Jingshan did not speak. As he supported her, his indifferent gaze shifted to the remaining half of the cake on the coffee table. Nanheng seemed to have thought of something. He first looked at Jinwan's slightly drunk appearance, then at the cake and walked over. He cut a piece into his mouth, took 2 bites and swallowed, enduring the unbearably sweet taste. He turned back to look at the person by the door and sneered. There's fruit wine in this cream. The alcohol content isn't low. Together with her fruit juice, it's no wonder she's so drunk. Jinwan tried her best to open her eyes, raising her brows to say, "Ah, I remember now. There really is a very special cake shop in Haicheng. Every day there are always people lining up to buy the cake. It's said that the cream in that shop usually contains some carefully brewed high-end fruit wine. No wonder the taste is different. It's really delicious." As she spoke, she pressed her face against Mo Jingshan's shoulder with a grin, softly saying, "In the future I still want to eat it, when it's my birthday. I still want to eat this cake." No matter how much he calculated, in the end she was still drunk on the cake. Mo Jingshan supported her, pressing her firmly by his side. He coldly said, "With your alcohol tolerance, you better stay away from that cake shop in the future." "No, I want to eat it on my birthday." Jinwan raised her misty eyes and raised a finger, giggling at him. "I want to eat it again. I don't want 2 layers. Just 1 layer, all right? It's fine if I eat a little less." Mo Jingshan did not speak. She pressed against his arm again, hugging him with both hands. "All right. I'll eat it on my birthday, only on my birthday." Mo Jingshan had no choice but to bend slightly toward her. Watching this drunken little woman, he softly sighed and kissed the tip of her nose. "All right." Nanheng pressed the space between his eyebrows and crossed his arms over his chest as he leaned against the decorative pillar in the private room. After knowing Mo Jingshan for so many years, she had never seen him treat anyone so gently and patiently. Feng Ling walked in from the door. "Mr. Mo, shall I send you and Mrs. Mo back?" "There's no need. The Yu garden is very close to here," Mo Jingshan said indifferently. Nanheng also drank quite a bit. "Send him back." Feng Ling's expression did not change. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "All right, Mr. Mo." Jinwan was brought to the car by Mo Jingshan. She was not very drunk, but she sat lazily and pressed her head against the window. Realizing that the person driving was Mo Jingshan and not Feng Ling, Jinwan narrowed her eyes and glanced at the handsome man in the driver's seat. She then leaned toward him. "Sit properly, I'm driving." Mo Jingshan was about to push her back. However, Jinwan hugged his arm and moved closer to his side. She pressed her face against his neck and softly asked, "Is my alcohol tolerance that bad?" Mo Jingshan glanced at her. It went without saying. Whether her alcohol tolerance was bad or not, based on her current state, was there a need for him to say it? Jinwan saw his gaze and opened her mouth to bite down on the side of his neck. She did not bite too hard, and the tip of her tongue inadvertently licked his neck. After several seconds, she was about to pull back when the man abruptly pulled out one hand from the steering wheel, holding her waist and pressing her against him. His low and hoarse voice bit by her ear. "You're getting more and more daring. You dare to directly seduce me in the car, N?" Looking at the man's deep gaze, Jinwan narrowed her eyes and smiled at him. She moved closer to his ear to whisper, "Why wouldn't I dare?" Mo Jingshan's brows moved. The car slowed down and drove slowly by the roadside. He kissed her lips and stared at her with his dark eyes. He was about to kiss her again. However, Jinwan suddenly said, "What a pity, great aunt is coming again." The man who was about to kiss her abruptly paused. He stared at her for a long time, and just as Jinwan was smiling at him in delight, he abruptly kissed her harshly on the lips. At the same time he stopped the car. He kissed this little woman who dared to show off in front of him just because she was on her period until she begged for mercy. Only then did he let her go. In the end, he kissed her lips that were much rosier than usual, sometimes deep and sometimes heavy. He said in a low voice, "Last time at Wanli Starry Sky Hotel, I still haven't satisfied your request. Isn't this a good opportunity?" With the help of the alcohol, Jinwan stared at the man who looked like he couldn't wait to press her into the car. She suddenly raised her hand and pressed it hard against his face. She squeezed hard until his handsome face changed shape. Then she chuckled, puckered her lips and kissed him on the lips. The man's gaze darkened. Unknowingly, she continued to hold his face to say, "Then you have to agree to a request of mine." She still knew how to raise conditions when she was so drunk? Mo Jingshan glanced at her. "And?" She stared at Mo Jingshan's dark, sea-like eyes with a hint of drunkenness. Previously, in order for me to inherit the G Corporation, my father had already enrolled me in a business management class in T-City. However, I never went. It's been at least 2 to 3 years. Mo Jingshan understood the meaning behind her words. His gaze darkened. You want to go now? Jinwan nodded. The school is T University. The professor in T University's business department is very famous. Right now, many of the managers of well-known companies in the country are his students. That's why I'm looking forward to it. The little woman's attitude was originally very soft when she was discussing with him. Furthermore, she was slightly drunk and her voice was even softer and sweeter. Mo Jingshan pinched her flushed face. I'll consider this matter. We'll talk about it when you're sober tomorrow. Jinwan chuckled and suddenly reached out to hug his neck. All right. Mo Jingshan glanced at the streetlights outside the car. He pulled her arm away and had her sit properly. He then went to drive the car. Before they reached the U Garden, Jinwan had already fallen asleep. Mo Jingshan glanced at the little woman who had just raised a condition with him, but now wanted to sleep first. He laughed angrily. He really could not let her touch even a little alcohol. The car stopped at the U Garden's parking lot. Mo Jingshan alighted first. He walked around the car to open the door and carry the little woman who was sleeping so soundly out. The lighting in the parking lot was not too bright. When it landed on the man's body, it was half bright and half dark. It gave off a hazy feeling. Jinwan opened her eyes in a daze and looked at him. She reached out and hugged his neck, burying her face in his neck. Chapter 169. What Nanheng said today was right. Sometimes you can't blame others for being too cold-blooded. You can only blame yourself for not being strong enough, Jinwan said softly in his embrace. Jinwan was slightly drunk tonight. Mo Jingshan watched her for a long time but did not say anything. He carried her back to the villa. After entering, she continued to hug his neck, watching his handsome face. I need to work harder. Work harder to catch up to your footsteps. Work harder to support my new life. The words new life caused the man's footsteps to pause for a moment. However, it was only for a moment. He carried her back to the room, leaning over to place her on the bed. Watching the drunken little woman, he supported himself against her body, watching her as he calmly said, "In the future, you're not allowed to touch alcohol." It seemed like in the future, even if it was a cake, he had to taste it for her first. Previously, he promised her about the cake. He took it back. Mo Jingshan. I want to become strong. I want to become very strong. I want to be strong enough that I don't need other people's pity or help. I want to be able to control my own life. I want to be strong enough that I don't fear any risks of life and death. I also want... The man abruptly lowered his head to kiss her, kissing back the grand wishes on her lips. Jinwan was already drunk. After being kissed for a while, she really could not speak and decided not to speak. She closed her eyes and hugged his neck. Jinwan quickly fell asleep. Mo Jingshan lowered his head to watch her. Jinwan woke up in the middle of the night to find that Mo Jingshan was not by her side. She sat up and rubbed her slightly messy hair. She then kicked the bed, pushed open the study door and the balcony window, but did not see any trace of Mo Jingshan. She stood on the balcony and looked down. On the U Gardens parking lot, the black ghost was not parked where it was supposed to be. She did not know when it had been driven away. She did not intend to be so drunk today, but the fruit wine in the cake mixed with the alcohol in the juice caused her head to ache even after she fell asleep. Even after standing on the balcony in the cold wind for several minutes, she was still unable to wake up. Her head was still aching. She rubbed her forehead and turned to return to the room. She closed the windows and threw herself onto the bed. She grabbed her phone by the bedside wanting to call Mo Jingshan. However, all she heard was a mechanical female voice. "I'm sorry, the number you have dialed is currently busy." Jinwan tossed her phone aside. Her head really hurt. She grabbed the pillow and pressed it against her head, forcing herself to continue sleeping. The black ghost sped along the road. Mo Jingshan called Nanheng. The call was quickly connected. Nanheng was a little drunk and his tone was lazy. "I thought after you sent Jinwan back, you and your woman would have sex at home and wouldn't have time to come out." Mo Jingshan. At this time he did not plan to leave Jinwan alone at home. The little woman was drunk and would occasionally talk in her sleep. She was also on her period. After helping her bathe and change into her pajamas, he was still wide awake. If it weren't for this, he wouldn't have come out with a single call from Nan Heng. Didn't you just drink tonight? Why did you go to Qin Siding's place to drink again? Mo Jingshan asked coldly. In Qin Siding's villa, Nan Heng sat on the sofa, narrowing his eyes to look at the bright lights in the villa area outside the window. He then glanced at Qin Siding, who was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows with a dark and cold expression. He chuckled and said, "This old man was afraid that he would take things too hard and came to take a look. In the end, he's been standing in front of the window like a block of wood for half an hour. I suspect that he has already entered a meditative state and won't listen to anything." Mo Jingshan calmly said, "Indeed, we shouldn't interfere in his matters." Because Nan Heng sat here and drank a few more glasses, he was slightly drunk. His slender fingers rubbed his brows, calmly saying, "I owe Shinianj a favor in America. Otherwise, do you think I'd be willing to interfere in her and old Qin's trivial matters?" Nan Heng was not someone who liked to meddle in other people's business. If Shinianj had not chosen his birthday to bring a cake over, and if Nan Heng had not been looking for trouble with Qin Siding these past few days, he would not have had the leisure to interfere. He was not interested in helping anyone. It was just that Qin Siding had been living too lonely these years. Seeing that he was living like a monk in meditation, he was not pleasing to the eye. He wanted to find some other stimulation for his peaceful life. Mo Jingshan calmly asked while driving, "Are you still at his place?" Nan Heng, recently he added quite a lot of good wine here. I drank a little and only finished it now. I'm too lazy to move around, so I'll stay here today. Anyway, we're two grown men. I won't let that pitiful Ling Xianer return and take advantage of old Qin's situation to do something. What's the matter, you're really coming? The wine that Qin Siding had recently added was naturally all from Mo Jingshan's hands. Mo Jingshan, wait. 15 minutes later. Nan Heng held a cigarette in his mouth, turning back to look at the man who had appeared in the villa. Mo Jingshan was dressed in black, appearing to be dyed in the night. He walked in through the door and glanced at Qin Siding, who was still standing by the window. Qin Siding put one hand in his trouser pocket and didn't intend to pay attention to the two of them. Even though Mo Jingshan suddenly came at such a late hour, he just coldly glanced at the door, withdrew his cold eyes and didn't speak. How long has he been standing there? Mo Jingshan walked in. Nan Heng turned to watch the tall man approach. His well-defined fingers brushed away the cigarette ash, raising his brows. He's probably been standing there since he came back. He was already like this when I came. Speaking of which, Nan Heng smiled mockingly at Mo Jingshan. You're actually able to come so late. Could it be that Jinwan was so drunk that she couldn't recognize you and directly kicked you off the bed? Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at him. You're very experienced? Often kicked by women? Nan Heng raised his brows, smiling as he held the cigarette in his mouth. He picked up the wine on the coffee table and poured a cup for him. Mo Jingshan did not receive the wine cup. His cold gaze shifted in Qin Siding's direction. From start to finish, Qin Siding had been coldly staring out the window. You've chased away the impoverished young lady you brought back so quickly? Mo Jingshan looked at his gloomy appearance and asked coolly. Nan Heng sat on the sofa, smoking as he narrowed his eyes and smiled. He also glanced at Qin Siding. You clearly have no interest in Ling Xianer at all, yet you insist on buying her. Keeping such a sticky candy by your side as the price, it's all because you don't want Shinianj to live too comfortably. DSK, what's the point? Injuring 1,000, injuring oneself 800, oh no, it should be injuring 1,000, injuring oneself 10,000. Chapter 170. Mo Jingshan walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, lifted his eyelids and looked out. Qin Siding stood there and looked in the direction of the villa not far away. The villa was dark and without light. No one had returned, and the black carved door in front of the door had been quiet for a night. There was only a floor lamp on this side of the floor-to-ceiling window. Under the dim light, no one spoke and there was a moment of silence. The whole world seemed to be quiet, except for a white cat jumping out of the high wall of the opposite villa, meowing softly in the darkness from time to time. Mo Jingshan put one hand in his trouser pocket, his calm, low and cold voice particularly clear under the dim light. Back then you disregarded your own safety to love her and then hated her to death. Now that she has returned, you keep avoiding her. Tonight, you clearly want to continue acting like a stranger. What are you still standing here looking at? If she doesn't come back for a night, are you going to stand here and wait all night? Qin Siding, who had been meditating for a long time, finally moved, but he only turned to glance at him. Who the F***ck said I'm standing here to look at her? As though the oppressive peace of the night was finally broken, Qin Sighting's brows were full of coldness. Do you think I'm the type to stand here and wait until dawn for such a woman? Mo Jingshan coldly said, her villa has been empty here for a few years and you've moved here for a few years. You've been looking at an empty villa for so long, and now that the person who left has finally come back, she probably still doesn't know that you live across from her. Don't you know how long you've been standing here every day and night? Qin Sighting. He abruptly turned to the sofa, picked up the cigarette that Nan Heng had thrown on the coffee table and lit it. After taking a few puffs to calm down, he coldly said, moving here was also a decision I made several years ago when I was ignorant and still immersed in the entanglement of love and hate. Now, I don't have any feelings for her. I'm just used to living here and can't be bothered to change places. Nan Heng sneered as he puffed out the smoke. Is it because you're young and ignorant, or is it because you've lived for more than 20 years and only had feelings for such a woman? Even now, those women chasing after you all think you're not interested in women. In the end, who knew that your pure young man's heart had long been crushed by a woman and hasn't been pieced back together until now? Qin Sighting was expressionless. The two of you came to my place in the middle of the night just to ridicule me for my stupid past? Nan Heng smiled. I do have that intention, but I don't know why he came so late at night. I said he was kicked out of bed by Jin Wan, but he refused to admit it. Nan Heng watched Mo Jingshan as he spoke. Mo Jingshan calmly said, I couldn't sleep, so I came to see how unhappy old Qin is. If he tells me, perhaps I'll be happy. Qin Sighting, can't sleep? Qin Sighting sneered. After taking a few puffs, he put out the cigarette. You too can't sleep, so you came here to watch me? Nan Heng was laughing with a cigarette in his mouth. Mo Jingshan only coldly raised his brows. Indeed, he could not sleep. She was not kicked out of bed, nor did they quarrel. It was his woman who wanted to go to T-City to study. She wanted to change her identity from Mrs. Mo to a business student at T University. Although she would only be studying for a few short months, it could be considered a temporary separation from him. This was clearly a decision she had made after the banquet that day. The little woman clearly dared to make this decision under the pretext of being drunk. Could he reject? He could, but he clearly could not. He could clearly feel that after Jin Wan's temperament changed several months ago, under the calm and mature surface, there was an indescribable vulnerability and sensitivity. She was extremely afraid of being separated by life and death. She was even more afraid of not being able to control her own life. She had more stubbornness in her bones, more things that she wanted to hold on to, but they were hidden very deeply. When Mo Jingshan returned, it was already close to dawn. The sky was still dark, but there were hints of white. He originally thought that Jin Wan was still asleep, but the little woman was tossing and turning on the bed. It was clear that she did not sleep well. It was only when he laid down by her side that she furrowed her brows and burrowed into his embrace, gradually calming down. Mo Jingshan stroked her hair. Headache. Jin Wan closed her eyes and nodded in his embrace. She was half asleep and dazed. She did not speak. Mo Jingshan's hand that had landed on her hair turned to gently massage her forehead. She did not move, allowing him to soothe the pain in her head. The little woman wore soft pajamas, her long hair scattered on the pillow on the bed. Her body was fragrant, and she leaned softly in his embrace. Her eyes were closed the entire time. She did not ask where he had gone and only instinctively snuggled into his embrace, unwilling to move away even a single inch. Mo Nwan's studio. The computer screen was filled with all sorts of messages that Xia Tian had sent her on MSN. Right now, Xia Tian could already walk normally with the help of a walking stick. She just needed to go through 3 months of rehabilitation. If she wanted to come to her studio to help, it would not be convenient for her to stay too far away. However, when Xia Tian studied with her in America, she studied at the University of Finance and Economics. She also specialized in financial analysis. Right now, the position of the finance manager in the studio was vacant. It just so happened that Xia Tian could come over to help her. This would save Jin Wan a lot of effort. The two of them were chatting in full swing when the intercom on the office desk suddenly rang. Jin Wan casually picked it up. Hello. COG hello. There's a package for you here. The call came from the mail room on the first floor of Jin Lin building. Jin Wan glanced at the caller ID and said, All right, I'll be down in a moment. After hanging up, Jin Wan typed a few words on the keyboard. Are you afraid that you'll have too many things after leaving the hospital, so you packed up your things and sent them to the studio? Xia Tian replied, No, I don't have many things. When I go, I'll just casually bring a suitcase to my place. Jinwan raised her brows slightly. That was strange. Why would there suddenly be a package for her? In this year, the domestic e-commerce industry had just started. She didn't have the habit of buying things online, and she rarely sent things to others. Xiao Ba or her secretary were in charge of the letters or phone faxes she received in her studio. Xiao Ba didn't know what to do with Xiao Ba. Why would there be a package directly sent to her? Jinwan directly went downstairs to the mail room on the first floor. The person inside handed her a square box that was not very large. Jinwan saw that the box was wrapped tightly and could not tell what exactly was inside. Furthermore, there was only the address of the recipient and her name. There was no address or sender written on it. Who sent it? Jinwan kept an eye out and asked. I'm not sure. Earlier, when I was tidying up the pile of boxes by the door, I discovered it. Chapter 171. Jinwan took the package and entered the elevator. The moment she returned to the office, Feng Ling glanced at the box in her hands. What is it? I just received the package. I don't know what's inside, Jinwan said as she prepared to enter. However, Feng Ling's expression turned solemn. She immediately became wary and turned to enter the office with her. As they walked, she said, I'll open it for you. Stand further away. Jinwan faltered. She was about to say that it was fine and that it was just a package. However, she saw that Feng Ling had already carried the box to the office table. Knowing how responsible and cautious Feng Ling was usually, she smiled and teased, All right, then go ahead and open it. Be careful. Don't let it be something like a bomb. As she spoke, Feng Ling had already opened the waterproof bag and opened the box. She lowered her eyes to see what was inside and paused. She then turned back to look at Jinwan. What is it? Jinwan walked over and lowered her head to see that there was actually a medium-sized doll in the box. The doll was dressed in a white wedding dress and was very beautiful and adorable. Why is it a doll? Who would send me something like this? See. Jinwan reached out to pick up the doll. However, the moment her hand touched the doll, a sharp pain spread from her palm. She softly cried out in pain as blood flowed down her palm and fingers, dripping onto the doll's wedding dress. Be careful. Feng Ling quickly pulled Jinwan's hand away and kicked the package onto the ground. Jinwan turned back and stared in shock at the doll that had instantly shattered into pieces. She ignored the pain in her palm and stared at the doll that appeared to be simply pieced together in the box. However, when it was placed in the box, it had already been dismembered. The floor was also littered with blades. The doll's wedding dress was dyed red by Jinwan's blood. The dismembered head and limbs, as well as the blood-stained wedding dress, were a ghastly sight. Are you all right? Feng Ling coldly stared at the doll that had turned from adorable to frightening. She immediately grabbed Jinwan's hand and saw that her fingers and palm had been slashed to varying degrees by the blades. I'm fine. Jinwan shook her head. The pain in her palm was not too serious, but the blade had cut deep and caused more blood to flow. She then turned to look at the doll on the ground. Her eyebrows moved slightly as she fell into deep thought. Whose prank was this? Or did someone else have other intentions? After confirming that Jinwan was standing at a safe distance, she walked over, bent down, and untied the blood-stained wedding dress on the doll. Only then did she see the blades stabbed into the doll's body. There were also many blades hidden in the wedding dress. They were very small and very sharp. Jinwan stared at the blades and then at her hands thoughtfully. After checking, Feng Ling stood up and said, The cuts on your hands are very deep. Go to the hospital to stop the bleeding and bandage them first. Jinwan nodded and turned to glance at the express delivery box. Feng Ling seemed to understand her and went over to tear off the receipt. As they walked out of the office, Xiaoba happened to pass by. Seeing Jinwan's hand, she immediately cried out, Oh my god, Boss Nguyen, what's wrong with your hand? Why is there so much blood? Jinwan indicated for Feng Ling to pass the receipt to Xiaoba. Go to this delivery company and ask them to find out where this package came from. If they don't do it, call the police to complain. Xiaoba received it in a daze and then nodded. All right, but Boss Nguyen, your hand, it's fine. It's just some blood. Don't make a fuss. Jinwan did not say more and headed out. Let's go to Dr. Chin's hospital. It's not far from here, Feng Ling said as she pushed open the door. Jinwan was still thinking about why the doll was wearing a wedding dress and did not say more. When they got into the car, Jinwan saw Feng Ling's serious expression. After thinking for a moment, she said, It's my fault for being careless. Besides, these are all superficial wounds. Don't tell Jing Shen in case he worries. Feng Ling was about to drive when she turned back to look at her. It's my fault. I shouldn't have opened the box and seen a doll. Mr. Imo will find out about this sooner or later. There's no way to hide it. Let's go to the hospital first. We'll talk after Xiaoba finds the results. Jin Wan lowered her eyes to look at her hand. Feng Ling did not say more and turned to drive. Hospital. Qin Sighting helped Jin Wan apply medicine on her palm while saying mockingly, "Do you really think I'm an all-purpose doctor? I'm in the internal medicine department. Even an external wound has to be treated by me. How did you end up like this in the studio? How exactly did you injure yourself?" Feng Ling stood by Jin Wan's side and did not speak. Earlier, when Jin Wan saw Qin Sighting, she finally diverted some attention and paid special attention to his expression. He still had that sly smile on his face as though nothing had happened in Zijing Cheng Club. "I'd be gentler." Jin Wan felt a piercing pain in her palm. She abruptly cried out softly, "Are you going to directly press the alcohol cotton into my wound? Can't you see that the 2 wounds on my palm are very deep? Can't you be gentler?" Qin Sighting sneered. "Endure it." Jin Wan. She abruptly raised her head to look at Feng Ling. Earlier, she had said that she would directly find a doctor from the trauma department to disinfect and bandage her wound. However, Feng Ling insisted on bringing her to Dr. Qin. It was as though aside from Dr. Qin, no one else was reliable. You don't need to look at Feng Ling. She was heavily injured during a mission in America and almost lost her little life. It was me who brought her back from the gates of hell. She is very stubborn. In this world, aside from me, no one else can be called a doctor in her eyes. Qin Sighting spoke indifferently and then used the alcohol cotton to wipe Jin Wan's fingers. When Jin Wan once again clenched her teeth in pain, he coldly asked, "Does it hurt that much?" "When my hand was injured, I didn't feel much pain." "Don't put salt in the alcohol, it hurts like hell," Jin Wan said as she retracted her hand. "Is it done?" "It's more or less fine. There's no need to bandage it. The injury on your palm is more serious. It needs to be bandaged. Your fingers are fine. You just need to apply some medicine to disinfect it." Qin Sighting's voice was mild. "For the next few days, be careful not to touch water in case it gets infected." Jin Wan nodded. Qin Sighting placed the rest of the alcohol cotton on the shelf by the side. He then turned to look at her. "Your hand is injured to this extent. Have you told your man?" "I'll tell him when I return tonight." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.